Chapter 295. In the sky, a few beams of light were heading towards the clear nether lake. Keep in mind, the person in the lead had crimson eyebrows and hair, a fishtail crown on his head, and a purple Taoist robe of yin-yang purple clouds. A long tasseled sword hung from his waist, and as he flew, he left behind streaks of rainbows. There were a few people standing on the clouds behind him, but they all looked worried. One of them said, "Uncle, will we be able to catch up?" The red-haired Taoist's expression was solemn as he looked ahead, but he didn't say a word. The people behind him also kept quiet out of fear when they saw his expression, not daring to say anything. This group of people were all disciples of the Shao clan. It was also because of the commotion Shao he had caused in the 6 rivers and 4 islands that the news of him seeking revenge on Zhang Yan had quickly spread, alarming the Shao clan. At this time, they didn't want to cause any trouble and clash with the master and disciple lineage, so they sent their clansmen to capture him. At this moment, in the mountain gate of Qinsong School, Feng Zhen and Taoist Mo sat cross-legged facing each other. In front of them, a clear water mirror floated, showing Shao He's current situation without a single detail missing. After being illuminated by a beam of light, he fell from the sky, but he was so dizzy that he couldn't get up for a while. Feng Zhen immediately said in bewilderment, "What is this?" Taoist Mo frowned for a while, then said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan doesn't have this kind of ability, so it should be some kind of transcendent artifact." Strange, where did he get such a powerful transcendent artifact? Could it have been bestowed upon him by the spiritual masters? Or did he borrow it from Tao Zhenhong? Feng Zhen's expression didn't look too good. With such a transcendent artifact in hand, if he were to fight Shao He in 3 years, even if he could surpass him in terms of cultivation, how would he be able to withstand this transcendent artifact? Taoist Mo looked up at him and comforted him, "Junior brother, don't panic. This transcendent artifact doesn't seem to be able to harm people. Moreover, the light caused too much of a commotion when it appeared, so the light clouds moved first. As long as you're alert in advance, it won't be difficult to avoid it." Looking at the situation, it seems that Shao He was too careless, or he wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Feng Zhen gave it some more thought and couldn't help but sigh in relief. No matter how powerful this treasure was, he had to be able to hit his target. As long as he could dodge it, there was no need to worry too much. The light that shone on Shao Bo was emitted by the small pot mirror. This treasure was originally used to open up an immortal's cave. It could not be used to harm or take someone's life. However, if one was illuminated by the treasure light, the spiritual vigor of the object that was illuminated would dissipate, and the baleful aura would disperse. Shao He had been too arrogant and was caught off guard. When the mirror light flickered, his inner breath and Dan fiendish aura dissipated. Naturally, he had been tricked. He was a tough and stubborn person. The dozen or so people from the 6 rivers and 4 islands were all lifted up by the waves by him and could not fly away. At this moment, they also fell from the sky like him. Even though they were all cultivators, falling from a height of tens of feet, even if it was not life-threatening, they would still die. However, a few people fainted on the spot, and groans could be heard from below. Even Sun Xian's hair was disheveled, her clothes were in tatters, and she was in a sorry state. After Shao He fell solidly on the muddy ground, he felt his whole body tremble, his chest tight and short of breath, and he could not exert any strength. He circulated his Xian Qi a few times, and only then did he feel slightly better. However, his heart was filled with rage. When had he ever suffered such humiliation in his life? He gritted his teeth and stood up. Just as he was about to curse, his vision blurred. He saw a talisman flying in front of him with a pen and paper attached. He looked down and saw that it was the Absolute Fight Book. He couldn't help but swallow the curses in his heart. With a wild laugh, he picked up the pen and wrote down his name. Then he threw the pen and said, "Zhang Yan, this young master has signed the Absolute Fight Book. Get out here now." Zhang Yan could see everything clearly from under the 12 palaces. Seeing that he had signed the Absolute Fight Book, he couldn't help but sneer and say, "You delivered yourself to me. Don't blame me. Mirror Spirit, activate the formation outside the immortal's cave." His gaze was profound. This Shao He had suddenly come to him, so it was definitely not for something as simple as revenge. Putting aside the fact that the Shao clan had no concrete evidence to prove that he had killed Shao Han, even if it was true, with the current situation in the Mountain Gate, they shouldn't be unable to wait for 3 years. Someone was definitely playing tricks behind the scenes. Since that was the case, he naturally wouldn't do as others wanted. This clear nether heavenly lake was his territory. To deal with a cultivator who came to him, there was no need for him to do anything. He only needed to activate the formation around it. The clear nether heavenly lake's protective formation was not just under the heavenly lake's water, but more than 30 miles away. Like the surging waves lake and the jade blood pool, when the 3 lake demons were present, the formation was even more than 100 miles away. However, after the Qinsong school occupied this place, with the help of a few heavenly abodes, and because there was no one presiding over the formation, it was naturally easily broken and no longer existed. Although it was rearranged later, it was only limited to protecting the cave mansion. It was no longer as heavily guarded as before. This clear nether heavenly lake was originally established by the great demon Gu Songyao, and later given to Zhang Yan by the sect master. Many people didn't know the truth and also thought that the formation had also been broken, but they didn't know that Zhang Yan had completely taken over the entire cave mansion. Aside from this cave mansion was also different from the others. It was originally established by the small kettle realm. As long as this treasure was in hand, even if the formation was destroyed, it could still be rebuilt by gathering the spiritual qi of the earth veins. At this moment, as soon as Zhang Yan issued the edict, the mirror spirit received the edict and activated the formation with a loud bang. In an instant, Shao He only felt smoke and dust in front of him. The black fog of the wind swirled, and the sand and stones were flying all over the sky. His eyes could hardly see anything. His heart thumped, and he immediately knew that he had fallen into the formation. However, his mind was still clear. He knew that the formation had only just been activated. If it was not a fatal formation, if he tried his best to break out, there was still a chance to escape. Therefore, he madly rotated the golden core, wanting to rush out in one breath. However, at this moment he saw a few black and white rainbows shooting towards him. Looking at the cold and fierce appearance, how could he dare to ignore it? In desperation, he could only stop his body and cast a spell to create a water wave to block in front of him. However, his body was stagnant, and he lost the last chance to escape. The ultimate battle was originally not limited by the means used by both sides. Just like how Tu Xian wanted to fight with Zhang Yan on Wanmingji, all the means that a cultivator could use would be used. However, generally speaking, because of concerns about the formation, not many people would take the initiative to rush to the other's cave to pick a fight. If they set a date, they would always find another place to fight. However, Shao He thought too highly of himself, and he also thought that this place was outside of the clear nether heavenly lake. He thought that he was unscrupulous. Although he was hit by the mirror light and suffered a loss because of carelessness, he did not learn from it. He thought that as long as he was careful, how could Zhang Yan hurt him again? Moreover, after writing the book, his ferocious nature rose, and he naturally did not want to weaken his momentum. He would make a joke of himself to the people watching the battle. Therefore, he stood still on the spot and was easily trapped by Zhang Yan's formation. Feng Zhen and Taoist Demo looked at each other. They only saw a flash of light in the water mirror, and then nothing could be seen. The two of them naturally knew what had happened. Feng Zhen was even more agitated. He suddenly stood up, kicked over the short table and cursed, "Shao He, this idiot, trapped himself in a hopeless situation. He can't do anything right, but he can only spoil things." Once the formation was activated, he would not be able to see the scene of the two of them fighting, so naturally he would not be able to pry into what kind of mysterious technique Zhang Yan actually cultivated. His plan had failed again. Feng Zhen was extremely resentful in his heart, and he could not help but feel resentful towards Shao He. Taoist Demo was also silent. His mouth opened, but he did not know what to say. At this time, the red-haired Taoist and his group had also coincidentally arrived in front of the clear nether heavenly lake. When he saw the scene of Shao He being trapped by the formation from afar, his expression instantly changed. He exclaimed in a low voice, "Oh no, I'm a step too late. However, he was not willing to give up on the goal of this trip. Xiao He was a direct descendant of the Xiao clan. If he was taken care of by Zhang Yan just like that, where would the Xiao clan's face be? In his opinion, he would rather be dealt with by his clansmen than let Zhang Yan take care of him. The red-haired Taoist immediately let out a thunderous shout. His body trembled, and a Yuanying figure shimmering with silver light flew out from the top of the door, arriving in front of the formation in a flash. He stretched out his hand, and in an instant, a large hand condensed from 5 colors fell down. It actually penetrated the formation and went straight into it, grabbing Xiao He. A look of joy appeared on his face, and he let out a chuckle. The large hand pulled back and was about to pull Xiao He out. After Xiao He fell into the formation, he was filled with regret, but when he suddenly saw someone coming to rescue him, he was overjoyed and quickly shouted, "Quick, get me out of here." Zhang Yan saw everything clearly from inside the cave abode, and he smiled coldly. This Xiao He had come to provoke him, but he was still unharmed. How could he let him escape so easily? He flicked his sleeve and slapped it on the mirror. Immediately, a dazzling light flew out of the mirror and went straight for the red-haired Taoist. At this moment, the red-haired Taoist was about to rescue Xiao He, so he couldn't avoid it. At first, he didn't care much about it. His golden divine spirit hand was also an extremely profound Taoist technique. When practiced to the highest level, it could explore the 9 serenities and gather all the mountains, and it didn't fear the invasion of external qi. However, when the light swayed toward the large 5-colored hand, his chest felt empty, and the 5-colored aura instantly dissipated by more than half. Xiao He immediately slipped out from under his hand. He couldn't help but be shocked. What kind of magic treasure is this? However, his reaction wasn't slow. He raised his other hand, which also turned into a large 5-colored hand, and grabbed down. But just as he was about to grab Xiao He, Zhang Yan laughed loudly and activated the formation. In an instant, Xiao He was teleported to some unknown place. When the red-haired Taoist withdrew his hand, he only had time to grab a silk ribbon. A trace of anger appeared on his face, and he shouted, "Zhang Yan, you dare to capture a member of my Xiao clan? Quickly release him, or I'll flatten your cave abode." Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and his voice traveled from the palace to the heavenly lake. "Xiao He and I signed a duel agreement, so your Xiao clan can no longer care about his life or death. If you want to break into my cave abode, that's fine. I, Zhang Yan, will wait here and see if the sect will sit idly by." You, the red-haired Taoist was just threatening, but he wouldn't really make a move. Not to mention that Zhang Yan and he were from the same sect. The clear Serenity Heavenly Lake was given by the sect master in name. How could he dare to be presumptuous and bring disaster to the Xiao clan? He snorted. Book C Pavilion. Net with a sound, Yuanying flashed and returned to his body. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan, this matter won't end so easily. You better think carefully and take care of yourself." As a Yuanying cultivator, he couldn't snatch Xiao He from Zhang Yan's hands today, and he had already lost a lot of face. In addition, Xiao He had fallen into the enemy's hands, so there was no point in staying here any longer. Moreover, he needed to inform the clan of this matter as soon as possible. Thus, after he said these words, he rose into a cloud, wrapped around the people who came with him, and flew away. Target equals, understood. Chapter 296. When she saw Xiao He trapped by Zhang Yan's formation, Sun Xian knew something was wrong. Later, when she saw the Yuanying cultivators arrive, she immediately felt that this matter was too complicated and not something she could get involved in. Therefore, after adjusting her breathing a few times and waiting for her body to recover a little, she took advantage of the time when the red-haired Taoist and Zhang Yan were talking to each other to quietly fly away in a beam of dark light and soon disappeared. The disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands who came here were mostly the relatives and clansmen of the island masters. When they saw that spiritual master Yuanying who came later was also helpless against the formation, they were also afraid that Zhang Yan would remember their faces and come looking for them in the future. Just like Sun Xian, they also secretly escaped on the conveyance light. Most of these people were at the mystic light realm, so Zhang Yan didn't bother with them. He glanced at the small mirror and saw that Xiao Ling was charging left and right. His expression was fierce, and he was shouting something. Zhang Yan chuckled. Although this formation wasn't an extremely powerful one, it was more than enough to trap a core formation cultivator. Without his command, this person wouldn't be able to escape no matter how hard he tried. It wouldn't be too late to capture him when he was exhausted. Xiao He also understood this principle, but given his temperament, he could not bear to wait bitterly in the same place. Thus, he seemed to be venting his anger by rushing everywhere to hide the fear and terror in his heart. Zhang Yan took a few glances before withdrawing his gaze. He originally wanted to deal with this person, but he suddenly thought of something and thought to himself, look at this person's cultivation method, it's extremely similar to one of the sect's 5 techniques and 3 scriptures, the mysterious lake true wonderful upper cave technique. Now that the grand competition is at hand, this person still has some use, why not keep him for the time being? He was certain that the Xiao clan would not come knocking on his door with great fanfare because of this matter, but it was unlikely that they would let the matter rest. After thinking about it for a while, he ordered the mirror spirit to take a few copies of the flying Taoist calligraphy talisman, wrote a few letters, and then made a gesture. Of these 3 letters, 2 of them were directed to Vice Headmaster Pan of the True Clarity Courtyard and Zhou Chongju of the Pill Cauldron Courtyard. The last one was directed to Yang Fenghe of the 9th City. What he was thinking was, today, the Xiao clan had actually sent a Reverend Yuaning to capture Xiao He. It was clear that this person's position in the clan was not low. After he captured this person, there might be some people in the Xiao clan who would go crazy and cause trouble for Tian Kuan and Madame Chen. Fights between disciples of the same sect would usually not involve the junior disciples of the sect. If you could touch someone else's disciple, it also meant that someone else could touch your disciple. Previously, when Wan Zhang and Wanan were making things difficult for Lu Yenyi, they were killed by Zhang Yan. After Vice Headmaster Pan learned of the reason, he just walked away. Afterward, the True Clarity Courtyard did not make any response, precisely because this was an extremely taboo matter. In Zhang Yan's view, as one of the 5 great clans, the Xiao clan might not send their clansmen to personally take action because of their status and identity. But for a large clan like theirs, they only needed to give a few hints and they could naturally order some of the smaller families to work for them. Even if something happened, they could shirk all responsibility. Therefore, this matter had to be guarded against. After sending out the letters, he called Lu Yenyi over and said, "Disciple, go to Marshal Nephew Chio's place and write a letter. Tell him everything that happened tonight. Do you understand?" Lu Yenyi was intelligent. Her beautiful eyes flashed slightly, and she immediately understood her master's meaning. She bowed and said, "Disciple understands." This was to indirectly pass this matter to Fan Chongqing. If Fan Chongqing knew, Qi Yuntian would naturally know as well. As the 3rd-generation eldest senior brother, Qi Yuntian's every move was watched by countless eyes. Sending a letter directly could easily cause unnecessary trouble, so Zhang Yan used this roundabout method. After the red-haired Taoist returned to the clan, he immediately reported this matter. After waiting for half a day, there was a reply from the clan. However, when he heard the news, his eyebrows twitched wildly. He grabbed the messenger and angrily said, "Eldest brother, did you really say that?" The messenger was a young cultivator who looked to be in his 30s with a mole on his eyebrow. Although he was grabbed by the red-haired Taoist, his expression did not change. He calmly said, "Yes, the eldest master said that it is not convenient for him to make an appearance, so you can deal with it as you see fit. But remember, do not embarrass the Xiao clan." The red-haired Taoist sighed and let go of the young cultivator. He shook his head and said, "This matter is easier said than done." However, he also knew that this matter could only be handled by him. After all, in the clan he and Xiao Han were the closest by blood. They were related as uncle and nephew. The father of the 2 brothers, Xiao Han and Xiao Han, was named Xiao Gong. Because his aptitude was not high, he was unable to break through to the Yuaning realm, so he wanted to reincarnate. However, the clan's rules stated that in order to reincarnate, one must first leave behind an heir. Xiao Gong's wife was also the daughter of a large clan, so she was naturally unwilling to give birth to an heir for someone like him who had no future. Thus, when his lifespan was approaching, he randomly found a female cultivator to raise these two children. He did not expect that both of them would have outstanding aptitude. The red-haired Taoist was originally happy, thinking that his brother's branch finally had a successor. He did not expect that Xiao Han would first disappear, and then Xiao Han would be trapped. If either of them were to die, his younger brother's bloodline would be cut off. This was not the most important thing. Before Xiao Gong died, he gave all the cultivation items in his bloodline to the red-haired Taoist, only asking that this elder brother would take good care of his descendants. At that time, the red-haired Taoist had not yet reached the Yuanying realm and was greedy for these things, so he readily agreed and casually swore an oath. But now that Xiao Han was missing, and seeing that Xiao Han might not be able to protect Xiao Han, the red-haired Taoist became anxious. However, it was not good to say it in front of the younger generation, so he could only pretend to lament and say, "Wulong, oh Wulong, it is my fault. I have let you down for not being able to discipline these two juniors for you." The young cultivator said in a deep voice, "Second uncle, there is no need to worry. In this nephew's opinion, this matter is not irredeemable." The red-haired Taoist's expression changed. He looked at the young cultivator with two moles on his eyebrows and suddenly showed some hope. He said, "15th brother, I heard that among the younger generation, you have always had your own opinions and can make decisions. Tell me, what should we do?" The young cultivator smiled and said, "What idea can this nephew have? It is nothing more than to find that Zhang Yan and beg him to release them." When the red-haired Taoist heard this, he shook his head in disappointment. How could that Zhang Yan agree? From the looks of it, the clan does not want us to fight them, lest we end up helping others. What else can I think of? Do I really have to lower myself and go? In that case, I might as well let that little bastard die, lest he embarrasses himself in this world. The young cultivator chuckled. His eyes flickered as he said, "Second uncle, don't be anxious. That Zhang Yan is not without flaws. This nephew has already found out that he has a disciple named Tian Kuan, who is currently in Jiui City." Although he did not finish his sentence, the red-haired Taoist immediately understood. He glanced at him and said, "You mean?" The young cultivator nodded at him. The red-haired Taoist fell into deep thought. Since Zhang Yan had captured a member of the Shao clan, they could also capture Zhang Yan's disciple. After thinking for a long time, he slowly said, "Fine, then let's do it. However, this matter needs to be done secretly." The young cultivator picked up the cup on the table and took a sip of tea. He casually said, "Second uncle, you don't have to worry. This nephew has already sent someone when I came. I believe there will be news soon." The red-haired Taoist was slightly surprised. He asked in a deep voice, "Who did you send?" The young cultivator smiled and said, "Second uncle, don't worry. Naturally, it will not be a member of the Shao clan. Even if they want to go, they won't be able to leave after this incident." The red-haired Taoist felt reassured. He said, "That would be for the best." The two of them waited patiently in the pavilion. After 2 hours, a letter flew into the window. The young cultivator took it and opened it. He couldn't help but sigh. "Good job, Zhang Yan. He was one step ahead of me." The red-haired Taoist frowned. "Did something happen?" "When the people I sent arrived, they found that there were disciples of the Righteous Purity courtyard lingering in the surroundings. There was also Fan Changqing's disciple, Qiu Hanyue, accompanying Zhang Yan's disciple. Thus, they didn't dare to make a move." The young cultivator placed the letter on the table and sneered. How could there be such a coincidence? It was clearly Zhang Yan who sent someone to make the arrangements. This person really isn't simple. The red-haired Taoist's brows furrowed. He sat there in silence. The young cultivator smiled with great confidence. "Second uncle, don't worry. This is just a small trick. It doesn't matter if it succeeds or not. I have another way to force Zhang Yan to hand over the person. If it goes well, I can even make the master and disciple claw at each other." The red-haired Taoist looked over with a questioning expression. Young cultivator, EF equals. Book C Pavilion net with a deep smile, he said, "According to the disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands, Xiao He signed a duel agreement with Zhang Yan. However, Zhang Yan forgot one thing. Although this duel agreement is useful, it needs to be sent to the Righteous Purity Courtyard. Only after the deacon or the chancellor has a look at it can it be considered a duel. The red-haired Taoist's eyes lit up when he heard this. He nodded and said, "Nephew's words make sense." Although the disciples of the Qinsong school did fight and fight, the sect was also afraid that the disciples would resort to unscrupulous means against each other. Thus, this rule was set. The young cultivator continued, "Since it's a duel, then we can report it to the Righteous Purity Courtyard. I heard that Zhuang Bufan and Zhang Yan had some disagreements. He was even punished by the sect master because of Zhang Yan. Let's go find him and let him be the judge. Let's see how he handles this matter." The red-haired Taoist pondered for a while. He was not very optimistic about this method. Zhuang Bufan was still a disciple of the master and disciple. Why would he side with them? However, this person was very old-fashioned. At least on the surface, he was very particular about the sect's rules. Moreover, the red-haired Taoist had no other choice but to nod in agreement. "We can try." He looked at his nephew and sighed with regret. 15th Wang, you are not bad. Unfortunately, your aptitude is too poor. You have cultivated for more than 30 years, but you are still in the first layer of clear qi. I'm afraid you have no hope of reaching the great Tao. Alas, the heavens are jealous of you. When the young cultivator heard this, he said carelessly, "This body was given to me by my parents. If my aptitude is not good, I will just be reincarnated. I have already accepted this." However, a strange light flashed in his eyes. He thought to himself, "If my aptitude is not good, I will not have a chance in this life? Not necessarily. Target equals _blank. Chapter 297. After Xiao He was trapped in the restrictive formation, he was extremely vexed in his heart, so he randomly ran around to vent the anger in his heart. However, after a few days, even though he was unwilling in his heart, he had no choice but to sit down and regulate his breathing. But every time he opened his eyes, a bright light could be seen flickering in them, and he seemed to be unconvinced. On this day, after Zhang Yan woke up from his meditation, he walked to the small mirror. Looking at Xiao He's appearance, he couldn't help but smile. "Recently, you've become much more well-behaved." The black-robed scholar walked out of the mirror, bowed, and said, "Master, this formation can only trap people, it can't hurt them. How do you want me to deal with this person? If you want to take his life, you only need to use the mirror light to eliminate his spiritual qi, then use a magic treasure to help." Zhang Yan shook his head, waved his hand, and said, 3 years from the inner sect competition, I'm in need of a fellow disciple to test my skills. Since this person has delivered himself to my door, he can be of use. It would be a pity to kill him." The black-robed scholar busily, "I understand. If this person can't hold on any longer, I'll give him some medicinal pills to keep him alive and not let him consume too much of his spiritual qi." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "That's right. In this formation, there's no need to worry about him escaping. The stronger he is, the more useful he'll be to me." Xiao He also practiced the orthodox Xian techniques of the Qinsong school, so Zhang Yan intended to use him to test his skills. He wanted to see how profound the 5 Xian techniques were and how powerful they were. Once he had a good idea of what they were, he would have more confidence in the inner sect competition. Not only him, but with the protection of the formation, even Lu Yeni could use this person to test her sword. He believed that with a core formation cultivator as a whetstone, his disciples' flying sword technique would improve a lot by the time the inner sect competition arrives. Right at this moment, Zhang Yan saw that Xiao He had already finished meditating and stood up once more. He began to shout and shout again, and all he said was to ask Zhang Yan to come out and fight. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since you insist on fighting me, I don't want to dampen your spirits. I'll do as you wish." With a flick of his long sleeve, he took a step forward and entered the formation, appearing behind Xiao He. He stood in the air and shouted, "Xiao He, didn't you say you wanted to fight me?" Upon hearing this, Xiao He jerked his head around and saw a handsome and carefree Taoist in a black robe standing not too far away, looking at him with a smile on his face. Judging from the face, it was none other than the legendary Zhang Yan. Xiaohe's eyes immediately turned red and all the resentment he had accumulated over the past few days rushed out. He roared, "Zhang Yan! How dare you play tricks on this young master? Give me your life!" With a flick of his sleeve, a wave of water appeared out of thin air, turning into a boundless tide that pressed forward. Not only did Zhang Xing not retreat, but he also took a step forward and shouted in a low voice. Countless wisps of white smoke rose from his body, and he also rushed forward, mixing with the wave. In an instant, the smoke and water collided, stirring up waves of white mist in the middle. Seeing this, Xiaohe was startled at first, but then he laughed and said, "Zhang Yan, you really haven't learned any Xian techniques. How dare you use Dan Sha to resist my Xuanzi true water? How arrogant! I'd like to see how long you can last." He snorted and spun his Jindan with all his might, transforming the wisps of Jindan evil into pure water. In a flash, an earth-shattering wave of water was launched. The waves in front pushed the waves behind, as if there was no end to it. Layer by layer, it pressed down on Zhang Yan. The Xuanzi true upper cave technique was the best among the 5 techniques for prolonged battles. At the later stage of this technique, a wisp of Dan Sha could turn into a river, and a wisp of Dan Sha could turn into a lake and sea. When it was used, it was like the Milky Way was pouring down, overwhelming and unstoppable. Even if it couldn't kill the enemy in one fell swoop, it could still overwhelm the enemy with its endless force. From his point of view, Zhang Yan actually dared to fight him head-on without using the flying sword technique that he was best at. He was really courting death. No matter how much Dan evil energy was contained in the gold core, how could it be compared to the huge amount of Xuanzi true water that he refined? Zhang Yan's expression was calm, and there was a slight smile on his face, as if he didn't care at all. He released the Dan Sha without hesitation. The sky was filled with white mist and smoke, almost covering the two people's vision. After fighting for about an hour, Xiao Chua saw that not only did Zhang Yan's Dan Sha not show any signs of exhaustion, but it seemed to be gathering more and more. Moreover, the force was extremely strong. He was also secretly surprised and said, "Is it really so powerful to have a Jindan of the first grade? It's a pity that I haven't broken through the shell gate yet. If I had condensed the Fa Li True Seal, this Xuanzi True Water would have been able to connect into one, and there wouldn't be any gaps in it. How could it have lasted for so long?" Now, his Xuanzi True Water didn't come in one go. Every time he used the Dan Sha to create a wave, he needed to adjust his breath a little, straighten his breath, and then release another wave. It seemed to be continuous, but in fact, it was intermittent and couldn't form a continuous wave. However, once he reached the second tier of the core transformation realm, and the initial condensation of the true seal, the huge waves formed would no longer have such a flaw. If someone dared to resist it head-on, then the enormous force of the water would increase ceaselessly. It would rise layer by layer, stack higher and higher, and gather stronger and stronger. So long as someone was unable to endure it, then that person would be completely crushed and swept clean by the force of the water. After trying a few times, Zhang Yan roughly understood that with his current Dan Sha, he could resist a first-tier core transformation realm cultivator who cultivated the Xuanzi True Water. However, he also knew that he couldn't speculate about the top 10 disciples. These 10 people couldn't be compared to the ordinary disciples in the sect. Not only did they practice their cultivation method to an extremely high level, but each of them could use Dao techniques. How could an ordinary cultivator compete with them? Take Xiaohe for example, he was already very powerful, but from Zhang Yan's point of view, such a person didn't have any other methods. If Zhuang Bufan was here, all he needed to do was wave his Daluo heavenly sleeve, and Xiaohe would be sucked into his sleeve along with the water. It could be said that there was almost no possibility of escape. He secretly thought, no wonder senior brother Ning cultivated the 1,000 Clouds Snatch Sword Manual and not one of the 5 scriptures. If he wasn't one of the top 10 disciples, he wouldn't be able to learn Dao techniques. If he practiced the Xian cultivation method step by step, not to mention that his cultivation might not be as profound as the top 10 disciples, if he really fought, he wouldn't have the slightest advantage. The Xuanzi true water displayed by Xiao He was only 20 years old. How could it be compared to the top 10 disciples' 100 years of cultivation? Moreover, when the Xuanzi true water reached the Yuanying stage, one would be able to practice the most profound northern dark true water. Among the third-generation disciples, only Qi Yuntian was able to practice this cultivation method. Just this point alone made him far above the other 9 disciples. After trying for a while, Zhang Yan had already fished out quite a few items. However, he still wanted to see how long he could endure under this boundless tide. Thus, he did not shrink back at all. He faced the wave and stood there like a pillar in the middle of the current. He actually did not move an inch under the boundless tide. This battle lasted for 12 hours in the blink of an eye. Xiao Chuo was shocked to see that Zhang Yan still couldn't get rid of him. He didn't think that the other could persist until now. Although his Dan evil qi hadn't been exhausted yet, he couldn't help but feel exhausted. He couldn't help but mock loudly, "Zhang Yan, this young master's Dan has reached the 3rd grade, and it's extremely difficult to pass through the chakra pass. But your Dan has reached the 1st grade. Don't look at the extraordinary accumulation of your Dan fiend. This young master wants to see how you will pass through the chakra pass." Hearing the slightly sour tone, Zhang Yan smiled indifferently and said, "Fellow Taoist is now trapped in my forbidden formation, and your future is uncertain. I'm afraid you won't be able to get out in this lifetime. Instead of thinking about how to get out, you have the leisure to care about me. It's very interesting." Xiao He's been in this formation for several days, but there was not the slightest movement outside. This Zhang Yan was still able to come and fight with him at this time. It was obvious that no one had come to rescue him. Xiao He couldn't help but feel terrified and said in a trembling voice, "Nonsense. I am a disciple of the Xiao clan. How could the Xiao clan sit by and do nothing? Just wait and see. In just a few days, someone will come to your door and ask you to let me out." Zhang Yan smiled and didn't argue. He only focused on fighting. Another hour passed in the blink of an eye. Seeing that Xiao He didn't have any new tricks up his sleeve, he thought to himself, "According to this situation, if I wait until the Dan fiend in my body is exhausted, it will be 2 days later. Regardless of whether Xiao He can hold out until then, he will still be delaying my daily cultivation. Why don't I try using flying slant again? Let's call it a day for today." Thinking of this, he simply withdrew the Dan fiend and flew out in a wisp of smoke. When Xiao He saw that Zhang Yan had finally retreated, he thought that Zhang Yan had exhausted his Dan fiendish aura. Unexpectedly, he felt a sense of relief and an indescribable sense of accomplishment. He laughed wildly and said, "Zhang Yan, it's not easy for you to hold on until now." How could Zhang Yan be willing to listen to his long-winded chatter? With a thought, a speck of sword light flew out from between his brows. His entire body moved along with the sword, and a beam of sword light flashed across the sky, slashing down toward Xiao He. Xiao He was startled. His expression changed drastically. Anyone who knew Zhang Yan in Qinsong School knew that his flying sword technique was the best. Thus, he didn't dare to be careless. He hastily summoned a huge wave to block in front of him, protecting himself from the elements. The flying sword technique wasn't focused on forceful attacks, but rather on coming and going without a trace. It was as fast as lightning. Thus, when the sword light saw the wave blocking its way, it only took a flash to circle around it and find another empty space to attack. Unexpectedly, Xiao He didn't attack at all. Instead, he risked his life to protect himself. After the battle just now, he didn't dare to underestimate Zhang Yan anymore. It should be known that the flying sword technique was all-pervasive. If he didn't guard against it, his head would be chopped off. How could he dare to be careless? Thus, this time, he used almost all his strength to defend. Zhang Yan didn't use the light separation and gathering technique. He just relied on a beam of sword light to circle around Xiao He a few times. Wherever the sword light shone, there was nothing but a wall of water and a monstrous tide. He couldn't find a single flaw. Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. He no longer fought with Xiao He. He put away the sword light and stepped out of the forbidden formation. However, he still looked unsatisfied. He turned back and said to the mirror spirit, "This person is still of great use. Keep an eye on him. Don't let him die or become crippled. The black-robed scholar respectfully bowed and said, "Yes, master." Zhang Yan nodded with satisfaction. In the next few days, in addition to absorbing the true sand essence qi and deducing the technique in the broken jade, he deliberately took out 2 hours to fight with Xiaohe. Every time he fought, he felt that he had benefited a lot. He even had the idea of catching a few more people to test his skills. Another 5 days passed. He was sitting on the couch absorbing the true sand essence qi when the mirror spirit flashed out. She bowed and said, "Master, there's someone from Zhengqing courtyard outside the mountain gate. He said he has something to ask master." Zhang Yan stopped and put away the Dan Sha essence qi. He smiled and said, "He finally came. Release the forbidden formation and invite this person to sit in the hall. I'll go see him in a moment." Target equals, understood. Chapter 298. The person from the Righteous Clarity Courtyard was just a young Taoist. He didn't have to wait for long before he saw Zhang Yan walk out. He quickly stood up and bowed respectfully. "I am Righteous Clarity Courtyard's attendant Qi Tao. Greetings, Uncle Master Zhang. I am here on Vice-Chancellor Pan's orders because..." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and smiled. "Attendant Qi, there's no need to say more. I know why you're here, so I'll go with you." The attendant was stunned for a moment before regaining his composure. Yes, please follow me, Uncle Master." Before coming, Vice-Chancellor Pan had told him that he was here to invite Zhang Yan and not to interrogate him, so he couldn't be rude. However, it was not a good thing for Righteous Clarity Courtyard to invite someone over. He thought that since Zhang Yan's Dan had reached the 1st grade, this matter would be difficult. He didn't expect it to be so easy. Zhang Yan and the deacon left the cave abode and used their escape techniques to head towards the Righteous Purity Courtyard. Not long after, they arrived above the heavenly prisoner peak. The deacon said on the cloud, "Uncle Master," Vice-Chancellor Pan said that this time, he invited Uncle Master to answer his doubts, so there's no need to go to the main peak's main hall. You can go to the side peak's reincarnation stream. Zhang Yan didn't mind, so he turned the cloud around and went to the side peak. He looked down and saw a few people sitting cross-legged on several blue stones. On the northern seats were Zhuang Bufan and Vice Monastery Head Pan. Opposite them was Taoist Qi Fa, who was in front of the clear nether heavenly lake. Other than them, there was no one else. He also pressed down on the cloud and stood on an empty rock. He cupped his hands and said, "Zhang Yan greets the 2 monastery heads." Vice-Chancellor Pan stood up and returned the greeting with a smile, but Zhuang Bufan didn't move. He just said in a low voice, "Junior Apprentice Brother Zhang. This time, I called you here because Senior Apprentice Brother Xiao Zhu said you had a personal duel with his disciple Xiao Chua. What do you have to say?" Zhang Yan spread out his robe sleeves and sat cross-legged on a rock. He glanced at the red-haired Taoist and said with a smile, "Senior Brother Zhuang, this Senior Brother Xiao is not being truthful. How can this be considered a private duel? That Xiao He and I both signed a duel agreement." Zhuang Bufan asked, "How is Xiao He now?" Zhang Yan said, "Within my clear nether heavenly lake's formation, there was no damage." Zhuang Bufan asked again, "Where is the book?" Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and took out the book. He handed it over. Zhuang Bufan took it in his hand and glanced at it. Suddenly, he flicked his finger and the book shattered into pieces. He said expressionlessly, "This book doesn't have the seal of the true Purity Courtyard. It was done privately, so there's no need to read it." Vice-Chancellor Pan frowned slightly, but the red-haired Taoist's eyes were filled with joy. Zhang Yan just smiled lightly, as if he didn't care at all. Zhuang Bufan stood up and said solemnly, "Junior Brother Zhang, let Xiao He go and we'll let this matter rest." Although he had a grudge with Zhang Yan, the 4 Taoist grotto heavens of the master and disciple lineage were all in seclusion, and most of the disciples were also preparing for the competition in 3 years. As one of the top 10 disciples, he still had to fight for a ranking, so he was cultivating in seclusion and didn't want to get involved in this matter. However, he was usually inflexible and upright, and when it came to enforcing the rules of the sect, he was ruthless. This time, the Xiao clan had come to him with the excuse of a private fight between fellow disciples, and asked him to be the judge. This matter was reasonable, and as the vice-chancellor of the Zhengqing courtyard, he had no choice but to accept. He wasn't happy about it. He understood that the sect leader had appointed him to be the vice-chancellor of the Upright Purity courtyard not because he wanted him to be an impartial judge, but because he wanted to use the Upright Purity courtyard to suppress the aristocratic families. There was no reason for the Shao clan to take advantage of him. Moreover, Zhang Yan's corps was now first grade. Furthermore, Zhou Changju, who was on good terms with the sect leader, was involved in this matter. If he didn't handle it well, it would easily alarm the other enlightened masters and cause a storm. Therefore, he didn't want to cause trouble and wanted to end things easily. The red-haired Taoist was slightly disappointed. He thought that Zhuang Bufan would take the opportunity to suppress Zhang Yan, but he didn't expect him to let him go so easily. However, this was within his expectations. Zhuang Bufan was a disciple of the master and disciples, so it was impossible for him to stand up for a disciple of an aristocratic family. He thought to himself, now that both sides take a step back and pretend this never happened, the clan won't punish Shao He too harshly. Vice-Chancellor Pan looked around. Although he also thought that it wouldn't be easy to resolve this dispute, he also understood that Zhuang Bufan's decision was unfair to Zhang Yan. In the eyes of many junior disciples, Zhang Yan had always been someone who dared to fight against the Celestial Gate's aristocratic families. There were many people who admired him, and this time, Shao He had brought people to provoke him. If he could return unscathed, once this news spread, it would definitely damage his previous reputation. A cool breeze blew through the mountain, lifting up the leaves and creating a rustling sound. Aside from that, there was no other sound. Zhang Yan didn't immediately answer. He sat there without saying a word or moving, as if he was thinking about something. Zhuang Bufan quietly stood there with his sleeves fluttering in the wind. Although there was no emotion on his face, he didn't say anything either. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't answer for a long time, the red-haired Taoist couldn't help but wonder, what? Could it be that Zhang Yan doesn't want to comply? He didn't think too much about it before, but now that he thought about it, his expression changed slightly. He vaguely guessed some of the reasons and was immediately overjoyed. If Zhang Yan refuted Zhuang Bufan's words today, he would be able to watch a good show. Not long after, Zhang Yan smiled and stood up. He said to Zhuang Bufan, since senior brother wants me to release him, it's not a problem. However, since the two vice-chancellors are here today, and in front of the Shao clan, I have something to say. Zhuang Bufan only looked at Zhang Yan without saying anything. Vice-Chancellor Pan coughed and said, Junior brother Zhang, if there's anything, just say it. Zhang Yan cupped his hands in greeting and said in a deep voice, I won't hide it from the two vice-chancellors. Although this Shao clan member is also a disciple of the Qinsong school, he has repeatedly tried to harm me. If I let Shao He go today, I'm afraid he will become even more unscrupulous. The red-haired Taoist was both shocked and angry. He suddenly stood up and pointed at Zhang Yan and scolded, Zhang Yan, don't talk nonsense. My nephew is indeed hot-tempered and impulsive, but he only came to your sect because he heard of your reputation, Zhang Yan. He wanted to exchange pointers with you and had no other intentions. How can you say that my Shao clan wants to kill you? Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Zhuang Bufan stared at Zhang Yan with flickering eyes and said, if you don't have concrete evidence and continue to cause trouble, the sect's rules will not tolerate you. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, I naturally won't talk nonsense. When he fought with Shao He, there was indeed a flaw in his book, but it wasn't because he was careless. He had purposely revealed this flaw. If the Shao clan dropped the matter, then it would be over. But if the Shao clan used this flaw to make a fuss, then they would be playing right into his hands. The red-haired Taoist felt a little uneasy when he saw Zhang Yan's confident expression. However, no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out what trick Zhang Yan had up his sleeve. Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and took out a human bag. He untied the bag and poured it on the ground. Immediately, a white-haired old man rolled out. However, this person was lying unconscious on the ground. The red-haired Taoist was puzzled at first when he saw this person. Then, as if he thought of something, his expression suddenly changed. Zhuang Bufan glanced at him and asked, Who is this person? Zhang Yan said in a serious tone, This person is the clan master of the Qing Shao Ho clan, Hobaksu. He is a relative of the Shao clan. When I was searching for medicine outside, I was ambushed by this person. Fortunately, I received help from a fellow Taoist. Just now, I have captured this person. After a thorough investigation, I found out that this person was ordered by the Shao clan to harm me. The red-haired Taoist suddenly shouted, "Zhang Yan, let's not talk about whether this person is Ho Baksu or not. Even if he really is him, how can you say that it wasn't someone else's scheme? Purposely trying to frame our Shao clan?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This person is here right now. Whether he is telling the truth or not, and what his identity is, I believe the sect has a way to find out. Senior brother Shao, you don't need to worry. If it really wasn't done by the Shao clan, justice will be served." The red-haired Taoist's expression turned ugly. The Qinsong school naturally had a method to search for souls. Not to mention the enlightened masters, even the two deacons in front of him could do it. If it was someone else, it would be fine, but Zhang Yan was a true disciple. If he really found out something was wrong, the enlightened master would take the opportunity to make things difficult for the Shao clan. The red-haired Taoist glanced left and right, and his heart was filled with killing intent. At this time, he was the only Yuanying cultivator standing here. Including Zhuang Bufan, none of them were a match for him. Moreover, Hobaksu was only a few steps away from him. He only needed one move to destroy his soul. No one would be able to stop him. Without concrete evidence, what could he do to a Yuanying enlightened master like him? However, he hesitated. If he really did this, then it would be impossible to bring Xiaohe back. Zhuang Bufan furrowed his brows. Zhang Yan suddenly threw out such a matter. He was also annoyed in his heart. He didn't want to see Zhang Yan going against the Shao clan, one of the 5 great clans. However, if he didn't do anything about it, Zhang Yan wouldn't let it go. It wasn't that he couldn't see what Zhang Yan was planning. If the matter with Xiao he didn't satisfy Zhang Yan, then the other party would make things difficult for him. Despite his reluctance, Zhuang Bufan had no choice but to take a step back. He solemnly said, "If that's the case, let's capture this person first. I will personally interrogate him. Before this matter comes to a conclusion, let's not talk about Xiaohe." Zhang Yan gladly said, "Very well, senior brother Zhuang has always been fair. I trust you." While the two of them were talking, the red-haired Taoist became very anxious. If Ho Baksu fell into Zhuang Bufan's hands, then wouldn't he be able to use him as an excuse? This was tantamount to a knife hanging over the Shao clan's head. At this time, he didn't have the time to think. He steeled his heart and suddenly stepped forward, shouting, "This person of unknown origin dares to tarnish my Shao clan's reputation. This is intolerable. You really want to kill this old man." Although his words were slow, his hands were not slow at all. A golden light flew out and hit Hobaksu's head. Before he could even make a sound, he died on the spot, and his soul disappeared. After doing all this, his heart was at ease, and he heaved a sigh of relief. But when he raised his head, he saw that Vice-Chancellor Pan and Zhuang Bufan didn't seem surprised at all, and they were just looking at him with a ruminating expression. When he turned his head again, he came into contact with Zhang Yan's spurious smile, and his heart couldn't help but palpitate. Could it be that he had fallen into a trap again? To be continued. Target equals _blank. Chapter 299. Since Zhang Yan dared to throw the Ho clan head to the ground, how could he not have prepared for this? But to him, this person's life or death was of no importance. His goal today was not this. Book C Pavilion Dash. He smiled and took out an item from his sleeve with a flip of his hand. This is the treasure that Ho Baksu carries with him. It is called the Pentasonic White Carp Shuttle. Assistant Monastery Head Pan glanced at the red-haired Taoist and said, "If I remember correctly, does this not belong to the Shao clan?" Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn and he nodded. Yes. Profound-level weapons were not easy to forge. Magic treasures like this were all famous. Even if ordinary disciples did not know, as a fellow disciple and the assistant monastery head of the Zhengqing sect, assistant monastery head Pan naturally knew. The red-haired Taoist's beard trembled as if he wanted to say something, but he suppressed it. In the end, he forced a surprised expression and said with a frown, "Oh, could this person really be Hobaksu?" Assistant Monastery Head Pan turned around and said with a smile, "Senior Shao, what do you mean by this?" The red-haired Taoist cursed inwardly and put on a pained expression. He sighed. The Ho clan and the Shao clan are in-laws. This pentasonic white carp shuttle was bestowed to him by the Shao clan. It has long since ceased to belong to the clan. If this person truly possesses it, then he must be Hobaksu. Who would have thought that he would use it to harm his fellow disciples? How hateful! Even though he was unwilling in his heart, he had to say it. He didn't need to look to know that Hobaksu's blood essence was definitely on this magic treasure. He only needed to check to know, so he couldn't deny this matter. Only by insisting that this treasure belonged to the Shao clan could he completely wash his hands of this matter. Zhang Yan nodded. "Since this is the case, then I will take this magic treasure for you." Assistant Monastery Head Pan laughed. "This item does not belong to the Shao clan, but was obtained by me after I caught a traitor. From now on, it will belong to you." The red-haired Taoist looked at the treasure regretfully. Profound-level weapons were hard to come by, and even the Shao clan only had a few of them. Today, it had fallen into Zhang Yan's hands. Thinking of this, he had an idea. Suddenly, he came to a realization. Could it be that Zhang Yan was here for this magic treasure? After thinking about it, he felt that it was highly possible. However, he did not regret his actions just now. That was an arrow on the bowstring that had to be released, so he had to do it again. He would also kill that Hobaksu. Otherwise, the Shao family would be accused of plotting to kill a fellow clan member. Even though the sect would not do anything to them at the moment, it was inevitable that they would lose a layer of skin. They might even reduce the spirit vein of the cave abode in the clan. This was far from what a profound-level weapon could make up for. His conjecture was not wrong. Zhang Yan had no intention of dealing with the Shao clan today. It would be a joke if Hobaksu wanted to overthrow the Shao clan. At most, he would only cause them some trouble, and he wouldn't get any benefits. He would never do something so strenuous and unrewarding. He only wanted to use this person to draw out this magic treasure. This 5-spirit white carp shuttle had been in his hands for a long time, but it still belonged to the Shao clan in name. If he did not explain its origins and it was exposed, it would bring him endless trouble. Furthermore, this magic treasure had a blood restriction on it. If a direct descendant of the Shao clan saw it, he could take it back at any time. If he didn't resolve this matter, he would be happy for nothing. But with the competition at hand, he needed to increase his battle strength in all aspects. If he had a profound-level weapon, he would not be able to use it. But today, in front of Zhuang Bufan and Vice Monastery Head Pan, he only needed to force the Shao clan to admit that this treasure did not belong to the Shao clan. In the future, he would be able to openly use it for himself. Once he achieved his goal, he would have succeeded. Zhang Yan stood on the rock and said in a clear voice, "In 3 years, there will be a competition within the sect. Recently, I have received orders from my master to cultivate in seclusion. If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave." Vice-Chancellor Pan smiled and said, "Junior brother, you may go." Zhuang Bufan looked deeply at Zhang Yan, but did not stop him. As for Shao He, no one mentioned him again. Everyone had seen what the red-haired Taoist had done just now, and they all had a tacit understanding. If they continued to harp on it, it would do no one any good once things got out of hand. Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands at the two of them. Then he fluttered his clothes and flew into the sky. Zhuang Bufan did not say a word and left with a flick of his sleeve. Vice-Chancellor Pan shook his head with a smile. Today, Zhang Yan had come to the Upright Purity courtyard, and he had thought that he would suffer a small loss. He did not expect that he would be able to obtain a magic treasure for free. This junior brother of his really had some tricks up his sleeve. He looked at the red-haired Taoist, who was standing there in a daze, and said, "Senior brother Shao, I will also take my leave." The red-haired Taoist hurriedly returned the greeting. "Vice-Chancellor Pan, please go ahead." After everyone had left, he sighed inwardly. It seemed that he was powerless to do anything about Xiao Bo's matter. He could only pray for his own good. After standing on the spot and pondering for a while, he decided to first report what happened today to the clan, lest any clansman saw Zhang Yan using the Five Spirits White Carp shuttle and misunderstand. Shaking his head, he used his escape technique and returned to the sect. Zhang Yan rode the wind and clouds back to the clear nether heavenly lake. Once he entered the hall, he immediately called Luo Xiao over and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, I have thought about it. The matter of the Wang sisters becoming my disciple should not be made public, so you can keep the invitation for now. This gift can be made up for in the future. Go write a letter and summon Kun and the Wang sisters to the sect. I have my own arrangements." Luo Xiao had been making arrangements for the past few days, but now seeing how serious Zhang Yan was, she hurriedly replied, "This servant will obey master's order." As soon as Luo Xiao left, Zhang Yan turned around and returned to the 12-layered palace. He sat on the couch and began to meditate. 2 days later, the small mirror in the pot fluctuated slightly. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and looked through the mirror. He saw a young cultivator with a mole on his eyebrow standing in front of the mountain gate. Judging from his aura and appearance, he seemed to be a clear qi cultivator. However, he looked confident and calm, with an unforgettable and unrestrained temperament. Zhang Yan asked in a deep voice, "How long has this person been here?" The mirror spirit in the mirror said, "Master, this person has been here since Master returned to the mansion the day before yesterday. He didn't open his mouth to see you and just stood there. Do you want me to drive him away?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "No need. Bring him to the mansion to see me." Not long after, the young cultivator was brought to a side hall. Seeing Zhang Yan sitting on the cloud couch, he immediately took a few steps forward and bowed. "Are you senior brother Zhang Yan? I am Xiao Yi. Greetings, senior brother." Zhang Yan's eyes were bright as he swept his gaze over this person. He asked indifferently, "Xiao Yi? You are a disciple of the Xiao clan?" Xiao Yi replied respectfully, "Yes, I am ranked 15th in the clan. Everyone in the clan calls me that 15th son. The one with red hair and red eyebrows that senior brother Zhang saw the day before yesterday is my uncle." "Then why have you come here? Does your uncle have something to say to me?" Xiao Yi shook his head and said, "No, I came to find senior brother because I have a deal to discuss." Zhang Yan didn't say anything. His gaze was calm as he waited for this person to continue. Xiao Yi spread his arms and smiled bitterly. "I believe that senior brother can also see that I am only at the first level of clear qi. I have been cultivating for more than 30 years. If I don't have the fortune of an immortal or switch to the demonic path, then I have no hope of reaching the great Tao in this life. It's just that when my lifespan is up, I will find a descendant of the Xiao clan and reincarnate as a human." At this point, he unconsciously lowered his voice. "I heard that senior brother imprisoned my clan brother, Xiao Han. If senior brother allows it, I would like to borrow this person's body." Zhang Yan's eyebrows raised slightly. A strange light flashed through his eyes. He asked in a low voice, "You want to take over his body?" Xiao Yi didn't hide his goal at all and said hatefully, "Yes. Xiao Han has talent, but he didn't cherish it and wasted this good body. It's better to give it up and let someone with virtue take it." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "You have to think this through clearly. Not to mention that taking over a body is extremely difficult. The slightest carelessness could result in the destruction of your primordial spirit. Even if you succeed, you won't be able to control Xiao Han's cultivation. It will definitely dissipate. That body will also be greatly damaged and its lifespan will be greatly reduced. What's the use of taking it?" However, Xiao Yi said resolutely, "No matter how damaged it is, it will far surpass this body of mine. Even if my cultivation dissipates, I will just have to start all over again. As long as I, Xiao Yi, use this as a foundation and work hard to cultivate, I don't believe that I can't reach Xiao Han's current achievements." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "You're quite determined." Xiao Yi was cutting off all means of retreat. After taking over a body, not only would the host's cultivation dissipate, but he would also no longer be able to reincarnate as a human. It could be said that he had cut off all paths of retreat and was extremely ruthless to himself. Xiao Yi saw that Zhang Yan didn't seem to have any intention of objecting and was overjoyed. He hurriedly tossed out the conditions he had already thought of and said, as long as senior brother Zhang is willing to help. However, Zhang Yan raised his hand and stopped him from continuing. He said, I will naturally send a steward to discuss this matter in detail with you. Whether you succeed or not depends on whether you can convince him or not. I won't interfere. After he finished speaking, he actually got up and left without saying goodbye to Xiao Yi. Seeing Zhang Yan suddenly leave, Xiao Yi was startled at first, but then he seemed to think of something. With a smile still on his face, he bowed loudly and said, I respectfully send senior brother Zhang off. Zhang Yan didn't look back. This Xiao Yi was very ambitious, but he didn't know how long it would take for him to reach the point where he could be of use to him. However, after Xiao He and the others had squeezed out all the value from him, there was no harm in throwing him to this person and treating it as a hidden chess piece for today. Xiao Yi waited for a while and a black-clothed scholar came out. He cupped his hands and said to Xiao Yi, Priest Xiao, I am Zhang Jing. I have served by Master's side for a long time. If you have anything to say, you can say it to me. So it's Steward Zhang. Xiao Yi was startled and hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands in return, repeatedly saying, I don't dare. As soon as this black-clothed scholar came out, he didn't sense the slightest hint of a living person's aura. In any case, he was a disciple of the Shao clan and still had this bit of experience. He immediately understood that this person should be a magic treasure and a true spirit. He was extremely shocked. It seemed that in the sect, only the people in the heavenly abode would be in possession of such a magic treasure. He hadn't expected that this Zhang Yan would actually have one. He couldn't help but feel awe in his heart. His evaluation of Zhang Yan went up another level, and some of his original thoughts were also extinguished. Chapter 300. After sending Xiao Yi away, the black-robed scholar turned back and entered the main residence. Zhang Yan opened his eyes slightly on the couch and asked, How is it? The black-robed scholar bowed and said, Master, this lowly one has an agreement with this person for 3 years. After 3 years, I can hand Xiao Yi over to this person to deal with. He brought another talisman up and raised it above his head, placing it in front of Zhang Yan and said, This is the spell contract that Xiao Yi swore with his heart's blood, so Master doesn't have to worry about this person going back on his word. Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh and said, Why would I be afraid of him going back on his word? He's just a Ming Qi cultivator. Even if it's the secrets of the Shao clan, how much can he know? It's just that I see that he's wholeheartedly pursuing the Tao, so I'm giving him a chance. Even if he succeeds in seizing the body, he can forget about cultivating to the core transformation realm again without dozens of years. Before this, he won't be of much use. The black-robed scholar hurriedly said, Master is wise, it was this lowly one who said the wrong thing. Zhang Yan waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. However, he also admired this person's boldness and boldness. He actually dared to come here and talk to him about seizing the body. This was an action that gave others a handle. If the Shao clan found out, he would probably be immediately beaten to death. If this person could make a name for himself in the future, he would certainly be an outstanding figure. After the children of those aristocratic families were born, the elders of the clan would examine their aptitude and arrange cultivation and other matters. There were many disciples in the large clans, but only those with outstanding aptitude were qualified to take a step forward and step onto the path of Tao. And there were many people like Xiao Yi in the Shao clan, but no one was willing to take a second look. If they didn't think of a way to take the wrong path, they probably wouldn't have much hope in this lifetime. So if they wanted to make a name for themselves, they could either be like Han Ji from the Han clan and break out of the clan while they still had some years left to live and join the demon sect, or they could be like Xiao Yi and fight with their lives on the line, even if they had to die a terrible death. As for people like Taoist Peng, there weren't many in the world who could set foot in the grotto heaven position. But in reality, whether it was the celestial sect of wonders families or the lineage of masters and disciples, most people did not have such courage. They would rather reincarnate safely than take risks easily. They only placed their hopes on their next life, always thinking that they still had a chance. But they didn't think that even if their aptitude in this life wasn't good, but at least they had a chance. Fighting with all one's might not necessarily be the only way out, but if one were to reincarnate, one would be placing all one's hopes in the hands of another. Xiao Yi also saw through this point. That was why he had this kind of seemingly crazy action. Zhang Yan didn't need to do much, so he didn't mind helping this person out. He didn't Yi Zhang and Yi Heave. Zhang Yi time flowed like water. Another half a month passed. 3 or 4 cultivators arrived outside clear Nether Heaven Lake, one of them wearing a lightning scarf. His hair was like a knife, his eyes were like a tiger's, and he had a curly beard on his chin. He was dressed in a large robe with crane patterns, and he stood on a yin and yang dharma plate. He looked up at Zhaoyu Mountain. Looking at the majestic mountain, he couldn't help but praise, "This mountain is worthy of the name, Small Pillar Zhou. It supports the earth and the sky, like a pillar of the world. It's so grand." Behind him, a Taoist nun with delicate eyebrows and a beautiful nose came up to take a few glances. She also said, "Senior brother is right. Other than the 10 spirit caves in the Donghua continent, such a cave abode is also rare in the world. I never thought that sect leader Qin would be willing to give such a blessed place to a disciple of the sect. Few people can match his generosity." The tiger-eyed Taoist nodded. The two of them rode the wind and talked. The tiger-eyed Taoist said, "This Zhang Yan has reached the 1st grade. I heard that he is the disciple of the alchemy grandmaster, Zhou Chongju. If we want to complete this treasure, we must ask for his help." The Taoist nun said, "That's right. I heard that this Zhang Yan isn't from the Qinsong school, but he could become a direct disciple from the lower house. He must be a great person. Now that we have a favor to ask of him, we must be polite when we meet later." However, after their compliments, there was someone who was not convinced. A young girl behind him scoffed and pouted. The Ne Temple is also one of the 10 sects of Xianmen. If senior brother Luo wasn't cultivating behind closed doors, why would he need to ask for this person's help? Beside her was a skinny Taoist. He agreed, "Senior sister is right. Senior brother Luo isn't any worse than Zhang Yan." The Taoist nun smiled and said gently, "Junior sister Jean, don't be unhappy. There are thousands of cultivators in the world. Book C Pavilion who dares to say that he is the first? If he can compare, then he can. If he can't, then he can't. There is nothing to be ashamed of. It is rare to have a 1st-grade elixir. The strength of the elixir is enough to pull up 9 whales. He is much stronger than junior brother Luo. If he can help, there is hope for senior brother's treasure to be completed. Master can also be relieved." Although the young girl did not say anything, it was obvious that she was not convinced. The tiger-eyed Taoist and the Taoist nun looked at each other and smiled. At this moment, they had entered the territory of the Qinsong school. In another 20 miles, they would be at the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu. They could faintly feel the vibration of the restriction formation. There might be disciples of the Qinsong school spying on them. This time they came with a request. By telling the purpose of this trip and saying some half-true and half-false flattering words, they would naturally gain a lot of favor. These people were the 4th-generation disciples of the Anjin Temple, one of the 10 sections. The tiger-eyed Taoist was called Zhao Hozhou, and the Taoist nun was called Shiyutong. Both of them were at the 1st level of the core formation. The young girl was called Jin Qiangyang, and the skinny Taoist was called Yan Zhongjia. They were both at the mystic light realm. Because they wanted to go to a famous mountain to explore an immortal mansion, they wanted to refine a magic treasure that could avoid water and fire. However, this treasure was different from ordinary magic treasures. When refining it, they needed the help of a person with strong core power. The last few times they invited people to refine it, they all failed because they lacked strength. They also wasted a lot of the materials they had, so they did not dare to lose any more. Just when they were worrying, the news that Zhang Yan had achieved the 1st level of the core formation came. They were surprised but also happy, so they decided to come here to ask for help. Core formation cultivators could also refine all kinds of magic treasures. The magic treasures used by the junior disciples of the Qinsong school were mostly made by core formation cultivators who had achieved the lower 3 levels of the core formation. However, some magic treasures with special effects were not so easy to refine. They required a deep accumulation of core qi and a strong core power. Just like this time, if it wasn't for the fact that Zhao Hozhou and the others did not have enough wealth, they would have invited Yuanying cultivators to refine it for them. When they arrived in front of the heavenly lake of clear nether sect, a sword light flew over. Yan Zhongjie took a few glances and said in surprise, "I heard that Zhang Yan is an expert in flying swords? Could it be that he happened to be traveling?" Shi Yutong took a closer look and laughed softly. "Junior martial brother, look carefully. Although this sword light is sharp, it is driven by profound light. I don't think it's that Zhang Yan." Zhao Hozhou said in a deep voice, "Yes, the sword light gathers and does not dissipate. It is clear and upright. It is a righteous source sword art. It is undoubtedly a disciple of the Qinsong school. You too, don't speak carelessly later, do you hear me?" When he finished speaking, he deliberately glanced at Jin Qiangyang and Yan Zhongjie. His tone became stern, obviously telling them not to speak carelessly in case they offended someone. Jin Qiangyang snorted and turned her head away angrily. The sword light flashed in front of the four and stabilized itself. A young girl in fluttering white clothes came out. She opened her cherry lips and bowed, saying, "I am a disciple of the Qinsong school, Lu Yenni. May I know where my fellow Taoists come from?" She swept her gaze across and took in the appearances of the four people. The two people in front were fine, but the young girl in the back was looking at her with a gaze that contained a hint of hostility. She had seen this kind of gaze from her peers in the sect many times. The higher the cultivation level of the person was, the more it was like this, so she didn't mind it. Shi Yutong saw that she was beautiful and had a graceful figure. She praised her in her heart and went forward to bow, saying, "We are the disciples of the Anata Temple. We are here to see the direct disciple of the Qinsong school, Zhang Yan, Taoist Yang." Lu Yenni returned the greeting and said, "So fellow Taoists are here to see my daughter's master. My master is currently in closed-door cultivation. I wonder what business you have here? Can you tell my daughter about it?" Shi Yutong was surprised. "Oh, so you are the disciple of Taoist Zhang. No wonder you can control the sword pill. You are indeed extraordinary." She looked at her senior apprentice brother, and the latter understood. Zhao Hozhou thought, Zhang Yan can even control the sword pill. He must be valued by the school. The rumors that he is in a difficult situation should be false. That's right. It is rare to see a disciple who has achieved the first grade of Dantian. The Qinsong school will definitely settle him down well. It was already difficult for them to invite a disciple who had achieved the first 3 grades of Dantian. But to control the sword pill, it would take Zhenren Yuanying 30 years of hard work. Who could do this without the support of the middle and upper levels of the school? Previously, when they came here, they heard that because Zhang Yan did not come from an aristocratic family, he was oppressed by the aristocratic families in the school. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. The incident between Zhang Yan and Wan Zhang, Tu Xian, and the others had spread like wildfire. Later on, he faced the disciples of the aristocratic families alone during the pill grading conference. Therefore, there were rumors that even though he had outstanding talent, he did not have a good life. Seeing is believing, hearing is believing. Previously, Zhao Hozhou had only half believed this information. However, if it was true, it would be a good thing for them. This meant that they would not need to pay too much to ask Zhang Yan to help them. However, the current situation caused him to feel somewhat worried. Shi Yutong said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Lu, I and my brothers also heard that Taoist Zhang has achieved the first grade of Dantian and is a world-shaking figure. Today, we happen to pass by here. Fellow Taoist Zhang and I are disciples of the 10 sects, so we wanted to see your celestial face. I wonder if it's possible?" Although she spoke politely, her words did not reveal the purpose of this trip. It was not that she was unwilling to say it, but it was the first time they met and they did not understand Lu Yenni's temperament. If they said it and she rejected them on her own, they would not be able to advance or retreat. It would be better to first find a dignified excuse to see Zhang Yan, and then slowly discuss this matter. Lu Yenni had cultivated for more than 20 years, and she spent most of her time outside slaying demons and establishing meritorious deeds, so she could tell that these words were nothing more than an excuse, She smiled lightly, and just when she was about to speak, a flying talisman flew out from the bright nether heavenly lake. She raised her wrist to catch it, and after looking at it in her palm, a smile appeared on her beautiful face. She raised her head and said, "Fellow Taoists, my daughter's master has invited you. Please follow my daughter into the manor." Chapter 301. Treasure Yang True's Sand Wondrous banner to protect one's life. As Zhao Hozhou's group of 4 were outsiders, they had to be on their guard. Lu Yinyi was careful. Out of caution, she did not open the door to the formation, instead leading them to the surface of the heavenly lake, intending to lead them in through the main entrance. Zhao Hozhou gazed over, seeing that this place was covered in mist, fish leaping and birds soaring, and the color of water filling the sky. He was instantly filled with envy. How could there be such scenery in their cave abode? Shi Yutang came up and walked alongside him, saying in a voice that others could not hear, "There is such dense spiritual qi even outside the abode. As expected of a cave abode. I wonder if fellow Taoist Zhang has an artifact forging furnace in his abode. If he could forge treasures here, it would be better for him to return to the sect." Zhao Hozhou nodded lightly. Still, he had not seen Zhang Yan yet, so it was still too early to say such things. Jin Qiangyang, however, had no such qualms as she said, "Junior apprentice brother Yan, how do you think the flying star stone in Mayana temple compares to this place?" Yan Zhongjie was the latest to enter the sect, and had never left the sect since he had started cultivating. This time, he had come out to temper himself with Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutang. Having always been on good terms with Jin Qiangyang, he immediately blurted out, "The flying star stone is senior apprentice Uncle Li's Dao arena. Junior apprentice brother has only been there once, and did not get a full view of it. However, senior apprentice Uncle Li is the Yuanying spiritual master, and Taoist Zhang is a core transformation cultivator. In my opinion, no matter how this clear nether heavenly lake is compared, it should not be comparable to the flying star stone." Lu Yinyi, who was leading the way at the front, laughed inwardly when she heard these words. Still, she did not expose him, and her expression did not change much. Zhao Hozhou, however, frowned, his expression darkening as he shouted, "Shut up! If you have no knowledge, then speak less. Don't you find it embarrassing?" Yan Zhongjie was startled and didn't know what he had said wrong. Shi Yutang shook her head and sighed. She first glared at Jin Qiangyang, then pulled his sleeve and whispered something in his ear. Yan Zhongjie's face immediately turned red and he was so embarrassed that he coughed a few times to cover it up. Lu Yinyi led the 4 of them to a water boundary that was surrounded by 7 pieces of floating stones. She waved her hand and a dark whirlpool appeared below, revealing a water hole of unknown depth. Even with the eyesight of the 4 people from Huanzhen Temple, they could not see the end of it at a glance. Jin Qiangyang stretched her head out to take a look, and she couldn't help but let out an "ah," yet she was slightly fearful. Lu Yinyi moved sideways and gestured for them to enter. She smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, please." Zhao Hozhou smiled and put his sleeves behind his back. He took the lead and stepped into the whirlpool of the underwater mansion. His figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shi Yutang quietly pushed Jin Qiangyang and Yan Zhongjie's back. The 2 of them let out a low cry and moved forward involuntarily. They only felt their bodies sink down, and then they were supported by a soft force, slowly sinking down. Although they were in the water, their clothes weren't wet in the slightest. When they looked down again, they discovered that each of their feet was stepping on a double-winged golden carp, and they were carrying them to the depths of the water. They couldn't help but look at them curiously. After about an hour, the 4 of them suddenly felt their eyes brighten. They saw a sparkling path in front of them, and at the end was a tall decorated archway with curved eaves, glazed golden tiles, and copper bells hanging high. On both sides was a crystal-clear water curtain, coral lake pearls, hawksbill turtles, and colorful shells were everywhere. Among them, there were hundreds of fish beauties swimming and playing, and laughter that sounded like silver bells could be heard from time to time. The more the 4 of them walked, the more shocked they became. They didn't think that there would be such a scene in Zhang Yan's cave. The formation and prohibition of the clear serenity heavenly lake was originally set up by Guizongyao using a small pot mirror. It had many profound aspects, and it could be changed according to one's mind. Whether it was extravagant or simple, it all depended on one's thought. Ordinary caves definitely didn't have such a scene, and it looked beautiful and charming. Although Zhao Hozhou didn't look sideways when he walked, there was a trace of worry in the depths of his eyes. In order to convince Zhang Yan, he was prepared to pay a big price for this trip. But now, it seemed that he might not be able to get what he wanted. His confidence was shaken a little. Shi Yutang saw her senior brother's worry and reminded him softly, "Senior brother, we haven't seen Priest Zhang yet, how do you know?" Zhao Hozhou was shocked. He knew that he was too stubborn and worried about personal gains and losses. If he met Zhang Yan like this, it was inevitable that he would be led by the nose. He was also skilled and immediately came back to his senses. He raised his head and smiled. "Junior sister is right." After the five of them passed by the decorated archway, they walked past a few layers of bead curtains and entered a large hall. They saw rays of light, auspicious air, and colorful lights. Their eyes were filled with the color of precious jade. Their mouths and noses were clear and the qi dynamic flowed a little faster. The scenery here was not enough to be described in words. Zhao Hozhou praised, "Taoist Zhang has found such a celestial place." At this moment he heard a loud laugh. A Taoist in a long-sleeved robe without a crown walked out from the back of the hall and said loudly, "I didn't know that 4 Taoist friends from Huanzhen Temple had come. I didn't go out to welcome you. Please take a seat." Zhao Hozhou saw that this Taoist had a handsome appearance and an extremely tall stature, very similar to the one in the rumors. He knew that this was Zhang Yan, so he hurriedly swung his horsetail whisk over his arm and cupped his hands, saying, "Are you Taoist Zhang? I am Zhao Hozhou from Huanzhen Temple. I greet you here." Behind him, Shi Yutang, Jin Qiangyang, and Yan Zhongjie also came up to greet him. Zhang Yan also smiled and returned the greeting. "We are all from the same sect. Taoist friends, you don't have to be so courteous. Please." Everyone sat on the jade tables on both sides. There were Yuji beauties holding glass plates in their hands. On the plates were pills, vegetables, immortal wine, delicacies, and many strange fruits and herbs that they had never seen before. These Yuji, who were wearing palace dresses and ribbons, walked with light steps, like butterflies flying through flowers. They were dazzling and too much for the eyes to take in. Seeing that Zhang Yan was so extravagant, almost like a Dong Tianjinren, the 4 people from Huanzhen Temple were stunned and speechless. In fact, these containers contained many of the old demon Gui Zongyao's treasures, and many of them were the treasures that Luo Xiao bought from the celestial market for the apprenticeship banquet, but he spent a lot of spirit shells. Who knew that Zhang Yan suddenly cancelled the banquet, so he let Zhao Hozhou and the others take advantage of it today. But the 4 of them didn't know that Zhang Yan was also using borrowed flowers to present the Buddha. They thought that the residence was like this normally. At this moment, even the most confident Shi Yutang was shaken. She couldn't help but worry and ponder. The Yutsong sect is a profound sect that has existed for thousands of years. Could it be that fellow Taoist Zhang is this generous? Jin Qiangyang originally had some thoughts and wanted to say a few words. But after sitting down, she couldn't help but be shocked. She stole a glance at Zhang Yan. Even though she was not convinced, she had to admit that in terms of appearance, this Zhang Yan was much more handsome than her senior brother Luo. He also had an air of elegance. The more she compared, the more she felt that this person was better than her senior brother in every aspect. For a moment, she was depressed. After half a day, when Zhang Yan was urging them to drink, he noticed that the 4 people's expressions were somewhat unnatural. They were also very serious when they spoke. It was difficult for even half a sentence of laughter to be heard. He was slightly surprised, but after pondering for a moment, he understood the reason. He smiled inwardly and thought for a moment, then he called Luo Xiao out to propose a toast. Although Zhao Hozhou and the others saw that she was a demon cultivator, Zhang Yan's expression was very polite to her. He even called her Taoist friend. For a moment, they didn't dare to underestimate her. Luo Xiao had cultivated for more than 200 years and had an extraordinary background. She was a smooth person. With her frequently urging them to drink, laughter could be heard from time to time. The four of them felt a lot more relaxed. Zhang Yan chatted with them for a long time. Seeing that the four of them didn't mention the purpose of their visit, he didn't take the initiative to mention it. Although Huanzhen Temple was ranked last among the 10 Xianmen, it was still a big sect of Donghua. It had many disciples and was quite influential in the northwest. There was no harm in making friends with them. If Lu Yenyi went out to look for medicine in the future, he could take care of her. Zhao Hozhou pondered for a long time before exchanging a glance with Shi Yutong. In the end, he decided to reveal the reason for his visit. He coughed lightly and waited for Zhang Yan to look at him. Cupping his hands, he said, "Fellow Zhang, I am ashamed to say this. We came here because we heard that fellow Taoist Dan has reached the first rank and that you have the ability to pull out 9 whales. We wanted to ask fellow Taoists to help us refine a magical treasure." Shi Yutang immediately smiled and said, "Taoist friend Zhang, don't worry. We will not let you suffer a loss when we ask you to help us." She raised her hand and wiped the incense pouch. She took out an incense burner from within and placed it on the table in front of her. She said slowly, "This is the treasure Yang True Sand that we've gathered. It's harvested from a high-grade fiendish vein in our sect. 1 grain is equivalent to a bucket of ordinary true sand." She patted the incense burner again and the Yang treasure sand landed on Zhang Yan's table. Zhang Yan looked down and took a look. Although the incense burner wasn't big, it was more than enough to hold thousands of grains of sand. This was quite a big deal. Even if he had achieved the first grade of Dan, it would be enough for 3 years. When Shi Yutang took out the sand, she looked generous as if it was nothing. However, her heart was full of regret. This pot of Yang treasure sand was left behind by their master after he passed away. It was originally for the 4 of them to use to refine pills. Just this pot was enough for the 4 of them to break through their chakras. Originally, they didn't want to give this item to him. However, after seeing the various scenes in the bright nether lake, they were worried that Zhang Yan's standards were too high and ordinary items wouldn't catch his eyes. Therefore, they could only take out the Yang treasure sand. Zhao Hozhou looked at the incense burner and felt slightly reluctant. If it wasn't for the fact that there was something in the immortal abode that was too important to them and that they could only proceed after refining that magic weapon, he wouldn't have been willing to take out the item left behind by his master. Zhang Yan didn't touch the sand and only asked with a smile, "I wonder what fellow Taoists wish to refine?" Zhao Hozhou let out a sigh of relief. If Zhang Yan was willing to ask, then there was a possibility that he would agree. He straightened his body and said, "This item is called the Life Protection Banner. After refining, it can avoid water, fire, poison, thunder, and evil lightning. Once it is used, it can protect 100 people. We have already prepared everything we need to refine it. The only thing we lack is a person with a profound Dan Qi to watch over the fire." Shi Yutang sighed softly, "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Zhang. The last few times fellow Taoists came to help us, they all failed because of this obstacle. Therefore, we can only ask fellow Taoist Zhang to help us. Fellow Taoist Zhang has achieved the first grade of Dan. If you are willing to help, it won't be difficult to refine this treasure." Zhang Yan's gaze swept across the 4 of them and he lightly smiled. "Forgive me for asking, but what exactly are fellow Taoists refining this treasure for?" Target equals, _. Chapter 302. P.S. Today is the last chapter, I'll update tomorrow. After Zhang Yan asked this question, Zhao Hozhou only thought for a moment before deciding to tell the truth. He bowed and said, "Fellow Zhang, when my master was traveling in the past, he discovered a cave left behind by a senior immortal and obtained a Tao technique from it. Because he saw that the technique recorded in it was also extraordinary, he abandoned the Tao technique of the sect and changed to this technique. Now, the techniques that the 4 of us practice are all from this book." Yu Yutang sighed softly and said, "Senior brother and I have been in the lower collapse realm for many years, and soon we will break through the chakra gate and step into the second realm. My master could have passed on the seed of the true seal to us, But something went wrong when he was practicing the Xian technique, and he had no choice but to die prematurely. He only had time to say a few words before he reincarnated. My master once said that there are still many mysteries in the cave, so we want to go there again to see if there is a chance to condense the true seal of mana. Both Jin Qiangyang and Yan Zhongjie also looked slightly sad. In the sect, if there was no master to take care of them, they would always be a level lower than others. Luckily, both of them had already achieved the golden core, so they would not be bullied by others. Zhao Hozhou said in a low voice, "There are many restrictions in this immortal abode. My master followed an elder of the sect and was able to escape unscathed, but that elder was heavily injured when he tried to pass the restrictions and passed away not long after returning to the sect. If we want to pass the restrictions, we must use the Spirit Life Protection banner to protect ourselves. That is why I came here to ask for your help." As he said this, he solemnly bowed to Zhang Yan. There was nothing to hide about this. In the Donghua continent, there were many such Taoist temples and immortal abodes, but most of them were left behind by itinerant cultivators. For true disciples of large sects like Zhang Yan, it was not worth it. As for the immortal abodes of ancient great figures, there were many that existed in the world, but cultivators below the perfected ones could not barge in. From Zhao Hozhou's point of view, Zhang Yan's Dan had reached the first grade. Naturally, his sect would have supreme Xian techniques to cultivate. How could their heretical techniques be taken seriously? Even if he delivered himself to her doorstep, it would be good enough if he could even take a look at him. Thus, there was nothing for him to hide. "I see." Zhang Yan nodded his head and thought to himself, there must be something special about the Dao technique that fellow Taoist Zhao cultivates. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up on this technique. However, he didn't find it strange. This kind of situation wasn't rare, because even though the cultivation methods passed down in the sect were superior, they weren't necessarily suitable for one's own cultivation. If there were any medicinal pills or magic tools left behind in the cave of the ancestor that could aid one's cultivation, then it wouldn't be strange for them to change their cultivation method. There were usually many disciples in a master and disciple relationship, but it was rare for them to truly stand out. Those who were truly favored by the master were only a few direct disciples. Thus, if there were other paths to choose, there wouldn't be any hesitation. Even many disciples in Qinsong school came this way. For example, Sun Jinren didn't cultivate that sect's cultivation method. What he cultivated was the secret book of billowing clouds that he obtained by chance. This Tao book looked unremarkable, but it allowed one to cultivate from the clear Qi realm all the way to the Grotto Heaven realm. It was a pity that although Sun Jinren gave Zhang Yan one of the Tao books, the latter wasn't his direct disciple after all, so it was impossible for him to give him the rest of the techniques. However, it wasn't that there were no flaws in cultivating outside the sect. After all, without the guidance of the elders in the sect, it was extremely easy to have problems when cultivating purely by oneself. Zhang Yan inwardly guessed that it was very likely that Zhao Hozhou's master had a problem because of this. He pondered for a moment, then asked, "Fellow Taoist Zhao, may I know how long it will take to refine this magic tool?" Zhao Hozhou and Yu Tang both revealed joy in their eyes. The former was even more spirited, hurriedly raising 3 fingers and answering, not much, only 3 days." Zhang Yan couldn't help but be slightly surprised, saying, "Oh, only 3 days?" He originally thought that refining this magic tool would take at least 10 days to half a month, and that would delay his cultivation by quite a bit. Absorbing the true San spiritual Qi was fine, but deducing the cultivation method was something that absolutely couldn't be delayed. However, he never expected that it would only take 3 days. Then there was no need to think any further. Even if he didn't receive any compensation, he would still lend a hand. Zhao Hozhou smiled bitterly, saying, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, although these 3 days aren't long, when refining this treasure, the cauldron fire is special." He pointed at himself, then pointed at Yu Tang and said, "Earlier, junior sister and I invited several fellow Taoists who had achieved the middle 3 grades of core formation to help us, but none of them were able to last more than 6 hours. Once this cauldron fire was ignited, it needed to be extremely powerful and it wasn't easy to watch over it. Those who didn't have enough core formation power wouldn't be able to fan the fire at all, and if this fire was slightly lacking, it could cause all previous efforts to be wasted. They had seen many people who were previously full of confidence end up exhausting their core formation fiend. Oh! Zhang Yan's interest was piqued. He had never refined any magic tools before. After a cultivator reached the state of core formation, many magic tools that were convenient for them were refined by gathering precious materials themselves. There were also many Taoist books on refining magic tools in the merit courtyard that could be read by disciples. However, he never lacked magic tools, so he never had such thoughts. Today, he could give it a try and see how difficult it was to refine a magic tool, so he smiled and said, "Since Taoist Zhao asked I to lend a hand, and we are all from the same sect, I will accept this matter." Hearing this, Zhao Hozhou and the others were overjoyed. They stood up together and said, "Taoist Zhang is indeed righteous." Zhang Yan smiled, waved his sleeve and said, "Everyone, no need to be so courteous. Please sit." The four of them sat down again. Yutang asked Zhao Hozhou with her eyes, and seeing the latter lightly nodding to her, she said, "I wonder if Taoist Zhang will follow us back to another temple, or go out to find a suitable cave to refine a magic tool?" This clear nether heavenly lake was full of spiritual qi. She really wanted to refine a magic tool here, but if Zhang Yan didn't ask, they would be too embarrassed to mention it. The journey back to the sect was long, and the journey would be delayed. The most ideal way was to borrow a refining room in the nearby Feizhou Celestial Market. It would only take 3 days, and it wouldn't cost much spirit shells. Zhang Yan raised his hand and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. I have a refining furnace in this clear nether heavenly lake. I wonder if the two of you have brought the furnace's fire?" Hearing this, Zhao Hozhou's face revealed a surprised expression, and he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes." All the refining furnaces in the world were similar, but the furnace's fire was different. There were more than 360 types, and what kind of magic tool was refined required a certain type of furnace's fire. There couldn't be a single mistake, otherwise the magic tool refined in the end would be incomplete. These furnaces' fire were cultivated in the sect, and cultivators could carry it with them to refine magic tools outside. The exception was flying boats, flying palaces, heavenly pavilions, and cloud towers, which were used to fly across the sky. Because they had no other use other than flying to defend against enemies, they didn't need to be so particular, and could be refined using the pit of earth fire. If that's the case, then there's no time to lose. Taoist Zhao and Taoist Yu, please come with I. Zhang Yan smiled as he stood up, and he said to Luo Xiao, "Taoist Luo, when I'm not here, you must take good care of Taoist Jin and Taoist Yan." Luo Xiao answered crisply, "Yes, master." Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and a formation door opened in front of him. He then beckoned to Zhao Hozhou and Yu Tang, and stepped inside first. Zhao and Yu Tang hurriedly followed, and as soon as they entered, they saw that the world in front of them had changed. What they saw was a cave that was more than 200 feet in length and width. In the middle was a fire pool, which was covered with grayish-white fine sand. There were 4 praying mats around the fire pool, and on the north and south sides were 2 yin-yang wind eyes that could be opened and closed at will. However, their gazes soon gathered on the cauldron hanging above the fire pool. The cauldron was copper in color, and had a total of 3 layers. The highest layer had an eave cover, and it was exquisite and detailed. There was a fire door on each of the 4 sides, and a strange unicorn with eyes like copper bells climbed on top of them. The middle layer had 4 dragon heads, and they spat out a golden ring from their mouths. There were thick chains passing through the rings, and the body of the cauldron was suspended. The last layer was round like the belly of a pot, and below it were 3 ferocious fish dragons that looked like they were alive. They raised their tails and raised their heads, forming the 3 legs of the cauldron. Zhao Hozhou repeatedly praised, "Taoist Zhang, this cauldron of yours is also extraordinary." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "This was given to me by the seniors in the sect. I am not good at refining magic tools, so this item being placed in my hands is like casting pearls before swine." This cauldron was called the Fish Dragon Swallowing Moon Palace Cauldron. If one looked at it carefully, it should be counted as a spiritual tool, and it was also left behind by Gui Tsongyao when he passed away. However, This great demon had no use for normal magic tools, so he had never used this cauldron before. Yu Yutong laughed and said, Taoist Zhang must be joking. Treasured tools and spiritual objects are only given to the virtuous. Even if ordinary people obtain them, what use is there if they can't protect them? Zhang Yan smiled. He didn't say anything more. He waved his sleeve, and a clattering sound could be heard as the cauldron was lowered from the ceiling. When it landed on the ground, a muffled thud could be heard, and everyone felt a slight tremor beneath their feet. He looked at Zhao Hozhou and said, Taoist Zhao, can you take out the fire from the cauldron? Zhao Hozhou nodded, and the smile on his face disappeared, replaced by a solemn expression. He took 2 steps forward, and with a point of his finger, a fist-sized cyan flame floated forward and fell into the fire pool. Then the fire formed a spell with his hand drilled into the fine sand, and disappeared in a flash, as if it had never appeared. After this step was done, he let out a sigh of relief. Together with Yu Yutong, he looked at Zhang Yan and said, Taoist Zhang, please make the fire. Zhang Yan smiled, waved his sleeve, and took a step forward. He didn't seem to make any movements, but a white smoke flew into the fire pool. In an instant, it circled once, and then there was a whistling sound, as if a gust of wind had blown past. With a hong sound, a deep cyan flame sprang up from the bottom of the fire pool. It was more than 10 feet tall, and looking at the intensity of the fire, it burned fiercely, as if it wanted to swallow the cauldron. This situation shocked Zhao Hozhou and Yu Yutong. In the past, when they invited a fellow Taoist, they had to expend a great deal of effort and hold it for a long time before they could fan the fire. They didn't think that Zhang Yan would be able to do it with just a raise of his hand. The two of them couldn't be mentioned in the same breath, and looking at his casual appearance, it was clear that he hadn't used much strength. The two of them couldn't help but look at each other, and saw the shock and admiration in each other's eyes. They both felt that they had invited the right person. Target equals understood. Chapter 303. 3 days later, a clear stream of air overflowed above the dragonfish cauldron, and white mist roiled like boiling water. The single-horned bronze beast on the lid of the cauldron let out a low and deep cry from its throat. The sound was long and drawn out, and the buzzing sound within the refinement chamber was endless. Please remember. Zhang Yan sat on the praying mat to the north. Hearing this noise, his expression did not change. His heart was like still water. The Dan evil was like rolling smoke swirling back and forth in the fire pond. The fire in the cauldron was like it was in the beginning, stable like a plate of water. It did not burn or weaken, did not increase or decrease. Zhao Hozhou's expression was a little excited. The strange situation just now was a sign of the birth of the magical treasure. It was called connecting the qi. After this magical tool was refined, it was full of spiritual energy like it was in the womb. It was full of spiritual energy and was ready to move. The moment it came out, it had to use a spell to open up the spiritual orifice that had been left in advance, so that it could breathe in and out spiritual energy, feel warmth and cool, and exchange spiritual energy with heaven and earth. This was also the most important step. Just like a newborn baby crying, if this step was not done well, it was very likely that all the previous efforts would go down the drain. Among all these, the fire was the most important and there could not be any mistakes. Zhao Hozhou stared at the front. 3 days of hard work, success or failure depended on this. He sent a few more spells into the cauldron. Only then did he have some time to look at Zhang Yan. For the past few days, Zhang Yan was as relaxed as usual. He sat steadily, his sleeves were loose, and his expression was calm. Even his breathing did not change. Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutong could not help but admire him. This golden core fruit was not something ordinary people could compare to. The Dan Sha was vigorous and had endless power. It would not be a problem to control the fire for another 2 or 3 days. Another 2 hours passed. The white qi became thicker and thicker, covering the entire room. One could only vaguely see the huge cauldron and the 3 figures. It was like clouds and mist. Clear spiritual qi filled one's nostrils. It was as if one was at the peak of a mountain. At this time, the fish dragon cauldron also began to vibrate. From time to time, it would make a deep drumming sound. Once the cauldron was opened, a flag flew out from the white chi and hung in the air. The flagpole was pitch black like wood and stone, and the banner was plain and unadorned. It was plain and unadorned, and looked unprepossessing. However, Zhao Hozhou didn't seem to be surprised at all. He took a deep breath and pointed with his finger. A flying needle flew out and coiled around the flag like a gossamer. Then, it pecked at a certain part of the flag. There was a ripping sound. As if it had punctured some kind of balloon, the flag shook violently and let out a series of crackling sounds like firecrackers. After a few breaths, the flag began to move without any wind. With a whoosh, it hovered in the air and immediately emitted a light that was several inches long. The color of the light changed and overflowed with colors. Zhao Hozhou's eyes were filled with ecstasy. He abruptly stood up from the praying mat and waved his hand. As if the banner had received an imperial order, it automatically flew into his hand. He held the pole firmly. He gently brushed his hand across the flag. He felt that there were countless cloud patterns on it that he did not recognize. He could not help but sigh. Originally, I thought that a protective magic artifact would be enough. Who would have thought that I would be able to forge a high-grade spiritual artifact? Moreover, the luster was glossy and deep. With just one look, one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. He couldn't help but sigh. Originally, I thought that a protective magical artifact would be enough. I didn't think that I would be able to forge a superior spiritual artifact today. This was Zhang Yan's first time refining a magic tool. He didn't expect that it would be a high-grade spiritual tool. He was a bit surprised, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt relieved. The spiritual energy in the clear nether heavenly lake was abundant. With the help of the fish dragon cauldron as well as the assistance of Zhao and Shi from the side, it was reasonable to have such a result. Shi Yutong softly reminded him, "Senior martial brother, if we did not have Taoist Zhang's help, how could we have forged this magic artifact? Speaking of which, it is Taoist Zhang who contributed the most." Zhao Hozhou immediately came back to his senses. He had spoken his thoughts without thinking too much about it. Although the right time, the right place, and the right people were all indispensable in the refinement process, there was no doubt that Zhang Yan's contribution this time was the greatest. At this moment he looked embarrassed and a little embarrassed. He hurriedly cupped his hands and apologized. "Fellow Taoist Zhang, it was all thanks to fellow Taoist's contribution that I was able to successfully refine this magic treasure today." This humble Taoist also forgot himself for a moment and spoke without thinking. "I hope fellow Taoist does not take offense." Zhao Hozhou was not a schemer, and his joy was genuine. Zhang Yan did not care about such things. He also stood up and returned the greeting with a smile. "My fellow Taoists, you praise me too much. This is just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning." Shi Yutong sighed and also came over to express her thanks. "Fellow Taoist Zhang doesn't need to be so modest. Speaking of which, the quality of this magical treasure has exceeded our expectations." It was a cauldron of treasure yang true sand, but it seems that we can't take it out anymore. Apart from that, we don't have anything else on us. She turned to Zhao Hozhou and said, "Senior martial brother, I heard that Taoist Zhang is quite proficient in the Tao of erosion runes. Master once said that there were many Tao books in the immortal mansion, all of which were recorded in erosion runes. They were left behind by the deceased immortal master. However, master was not proficient in erosion runes, so he did not bring them out. If this trip goes smoothly, we might as well make a copy and give it to Taoist Zhang for reference. What do you think, senior martial brother?" Zhao Hozhou was startled. He did not understand why his junior martial sister would bring this up. The Tao books with erosion runes were not actually in the immortal mansion. Instead, they had been brought back by his master many years ago. He had read them several times, but because the contents were difficult and abstruse, it gave him a splitting headache. Therefore, he had thrown them aside, and since then, they had been shelved and no one had asked about them. However, he cultivated the cultivation method that the immortal mansion's master had interpreted. Even if the Tao books with erosion runes contained supreme techniques, they were useless in front of them. It was not a big deal to give them away. Therefore, he did not think too much about it and agreed, Junior Marshall sister is right. Those Tao books with erosion runes are a waste in our hands. If Taoist Zhang does not mind, we will personally return them to your immortal mansion when we return. After hearing this, Zhang Yan's eyes could not help but light up slightly. There were many mysteries hidden in the erosion runes. It could be said that in ancient times, every Tao book with erosion runes was a treasure. Even if one did not cultivate the cultivation method within, they could still benefit from it. In the worst-case scenario, they could be passed on to the disciples of the younger generation. Just from the fact that Zhao Hozhou and she could cultivate to the level of core transformation, one could know that the cultivation method within was not ordinary. Thus, he didn't try to evade it and said generously, "All right, fellow Taoist has good intentions, then I'll accept it." Seeing that Zhang Yan was willing to accept it, Shi Yutang could not help but feel happy. She thought that the biggest gain from this trip was not the magic treasure, but the friendship with this person. There were many disciples in the Enata temple, but after the death of their master, they were all alone. There were many things that were tied up and not as smooth as before. If they could have Zhang Yan's help outside, it would be greatly beneficial to their future cultivation. However, with her meticulous observation, she could tell that Zhang Yan did not really care about the treasure Yang True Sand that they had given out. However, the reason why he was willing to agree was because refining the magic treasure this time would not take up too much time, and for the sake of the celestial sect of wonders. This kind of friendship was not reliable. Before she came, she had specially inquired about Zhang Yan's past and found out that he was also good at reading erosion runes. Therefore, after some consideration, she decided to take the initiative to give him the erosion runes Tao book to improve their relationship. She did not expect that it would actually be to his liking. The three of them chatted for a while in the refining room. Zhao Hozhou saw that the magic treasure was in his hands. Although he did not show it on his face, he was in a hurry to leave. As he spoke, he was a little absent-minded. Zhang Yan also saw this and smiled. There is a big competition in the I sect in 3 years. I still need to cultivate in seclusion, so I will not keep you any longer. Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutang looked at each other and said in unison, "Then we will take our leave. We will bring the Tao book to visit you another day." Zhang Yan also returned the gesture. After the two sides said goodbye to each other, he sent them and their 2 fellow disciples out of the house. Roaring Fire Palace, Molten Smoke Island. In the main hall, a white-robed Taoist was sitting peacefully with a bamboo scroll in his hand. Feng Zhen knelt on the ground, his body trembling. His back was covered in cold sweat. He had been kneeling here for a whole day. At first, he did not feel anything, but the more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. No matter how he thought about it, he did not know what he had done. However, he knew his teacher's temper very well. If the teacher did not say anything, he did not dare to ask. 2 days later, a letter came from outside. The white-robed Taoist took it and read it. Just now, he took the bamboo scroll away from his face, looked down, and said in a bland tone, "You know, if you stayed on the Panchi Island 2 days ago, you would have been captured and beaten to death by the Xiao family." Feng Zhen's ears instantly rumbled like thunder when he heard this, and his entire body shivered. He instantly knew that the matter of him secretly spreading rumors had been found out by the Xiao clan, and he hurriedly kowtowed while saying repeatedly, "Thank you, benefactor, for taking care of me. Thank you, benefactor, for taking care of me." After he kowtowed for hundreds of times, the white-robed Taoist finally said, "It's done." Feng Zhen hurriedly stopped, but still did not dare to raise his head. "I have suppressed your matter for you. The Xiao family will not touch you again." The white-robed Taoist glanced at him. "In the future, if you want to play tricks like this, don't let others catch you. Otherwise, I will lose face." Hearing his teacher say so, Feng Zhen's worried heart was finally put down. The white-robed Taoist swung his hand, and with a pa sound, he threw the bamboo scroll in his hand to the ground. He said indifferently, "This is a Taoist technique that I have researched recently. No one has practiced it before. In 3 years, you will have to fight with Zhang Yan. Take it back and practice it well. If you lose at that time, don't come back to see me." Feng Zhen prostrated on the ground again and said loudly, Yes, sure Fu. After a while, when he heard that there was no more movement, he quietly raised his head to take a look, and when he saw that there was no one on the high couch, he let out a sigh of relief. He stretched out his hand to pick up the bamboo slip, and after looking through it, he felt both happy and worried. He was happy because after all these years, his master had finally taught him the Tao. However, he was worried because if he couldn't defeat Zhang Yan, his name would be removed from the sect. He was originally a side-branch disciple of the Feng family. If he didn't have the protection of the sect, he wouldn't be able to stand out in the future. His expression changed several times. At last, he clenched his teeth, put the bamboo scroll into his bag, stood up, turned into a red smoke, and left the roaring fire palace. Target equals, underselect. Chapter 304. 2 days had passed since Zhang Yan had helped Zhao Hozhou and the others forge the Dharma treasures. A flying boat arrived outside the clear nether heavenly lake with dozens of men and women standing on it. Yang Fanghe stood at the very front with a cane in his hand. He turned his head and looked at the pair of twin sisters behind him. He coughed a few times before saying, "When you're under Guru Zhang's tutelage, you can't do whatever you want, especially Miss Wang." His gaze wandered. The two girls looked exactly the same, so he couldn't tell which was the older sister and which was the younger sister. However, he knew that Miss Wang was the most restless. If it wasn't for the fact that he really couldn't find a suitable candidate, he absolutely wouldn't want to get involved with the two sisters. What happened later proved that his previous worries weren't unfounded. Just now, when he introduced the two sisters, the news that he had offended Zhang Yan's disciple, Tian Kuan, came out. At that time, he was so scared that he almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, the Wang clan leader had some tricks up his sleeve, so he was able to smooth over the matter. And now that he was about to bring the two sisters into Zhang Yan's tutelage, he was also a little uneasy, afraid that something unexpected would happen and implicate him, so he couldn't help but repeatedly take care of them. The delicate girl standing on his right side curled her lips and said, "I know, Yang Wang, you've said it more than 100 times, Kading's ears are about to get calluses." The other girl bowed to Yang Fanghe and said softly, "Yang Wang, fourth sister has already been engaged to senior brother Tian. Even so, I believe that Guru Zhang won't take what happened that day to heart." Yang Fanghe nodded repeatedly, also slightly relieved. Since the two families were going to be engaged, no matter what this Miss Wang did, it was still an internal matter of their sect. If it wasn't for this reason, he would rather not mention the matter of taking in a disciple, and he wouldn't dare to send the Wang sisters up. He really couldn't take the fright. But when that Miss Wang heard this, her face and ears immediately turned red. She secretly glanced at Tian Kuan, who was standing in the distance. Seeing that the latter seemed to sense something and looked back, she immediately didn't dare to look again. Tian Kuan had grown up in the underwater mansion. He had never come into contact with anyone of his age, so he didn't really know what marriage meant. He only had a vague idea about it. But since this was arranged by his mother, he wouldn't reject it. He would treat Wang Xianyangzi the same way he treated her before. There was nothing unnatural about it. On the way up to the Heaven Lake, the two Wang sisters were mesmerized by the wondrous scenery around them, unconsciously feeling refreshed. At this time, a beam of light flew over in front of them and everyone looked over. They saw a woman in colorful clothes standing on a blue flower. She floated over like a fairy. This woman's eyebrows were dark and her eyes were like autumn waves. She stood there and said, "This servant is Shang Shang, a servant under master. I'm here to receive Mr. Yang, Tian Delong and the two ladies." Yang Fanghe hurriedly said, "I don't dare." "Thank you, Madam Shang." He'd met Shang Chang the last time he came here, so he knew that even though this woman was a demon cultivator, she was one of the two managers of Bright Nether Lake, and her cultivation was even above his own. So he naturally didn't dare be disrespectful. Tian Kuan didn't step forward, but he still stood at a distance to greet her. The two Wang sisters didn't dare to be negligent, both bowing as a greeting. Wang Xianyangzi's eyes turned and she said affectionately, "This is my daughter Wang Kading." "Greetings, Auntie Shang." Shang Chang glanced at Wang Kading, then at Tian Kuan. She said seriously, I'm not worthy of the title of Wang Xianyangzi. This servant is just a servant girl. She didn't say anything more. She raised her hand and a light flashed from the token in her hand, opening the formation door on the surface of the heaven lake. She lifted the hem of her dress and took a step forward. She looked back and said, "Everyone, please follow this servant." After sending the Wang sisters here, Yang Fenghe's mission was complete. His mind relaxed, and he thought of the fear and trepidation he'd felt when he saw Zhang Yan the last time. He didn't want to go any further, so he gave the two girls a few more reminders before bidding farewell and leaving. The two sisters followed Shang Shang into the cave dwelling. The scenery of this heaven lake was marvelous and magnificent. The two ladies couldn't help but be entranced by it. Not long after, the two of them felt the flying vessel beneath them tremble lightly. It had stopped. Shang Shang said, "Please invite Tiandeng, the two ladies, and this servant to greet the master." Shang Chang led the three into the inner hall. Tian Kun raised his head and saw his master sitting peacefully on the couch, and Lu Yenny in white standing beside him. He hurriedly came forward and kowtowed, saying, "Disciple Tian Kun pays his respects to master." It was the first time the Wang sisters had arrived here, and they couldn't help feeling a little nervous. They didn't dare to look too much, and they went forward together, kneeling down and kowtowing. However, their master-disciple relationship with Zhang Yan hadn't been decided yet, so it wasn't appropriate for them to address him as master, and so they could only address him as master for the time being. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled, saying, "Tian Kun is my disciple, get up first." Tian Kun stood up and obediently stood to the side. The Wang sisters saw that Zhang Yan didn't ask them to get up, so they didn't dare to move and continued to kneel there, not even daring to breathe too loudly. Zhang Yan's gaze swept over them, and he saw that the two Wang sisters had black hair that cascaded down like a waterfall, skin as white as snow, and a slim figure. They were both bright and beautiful, but it wasn't just their appearance that was good, their aptitude really wasn't bad. Even though they couldn't compare to a beautiful person like Lu Yenny, they could still be considered one in a million, and he couldn't help nodding his head slightly. With a glance from a normal person, it would be hard to tell who was who between these two sisters, but his eyes were sharp, and he could see the whole picture from just a few small details. He could see the difference between the two just from a few small movements. The young girl on the left had calm eyes, her expression as cold as autumn frost. Ever since she had come in, she had not lost her composure in any of her actions. After kneeling for a while, she still didn't move. Zhang Yan nodded. This girl should be the older sister, Wang Kaiwei. He then looked to the right. When the young girl had come in, her footsteps had been quick, but after kneeling for a while, she couldn't help her shoulders trembling and her eyelashes trembling. It could be seen that she had a lively and active personality, and was undoubtedly the Wang Kading who was betrothed to Tian Kun. After Zhang Yan looked over, he said in a deep voice, "Today, I will take you two sisters as honorary disciples. In the future, after the ceremony of taking you as my master, you will be able to enter my sect. You two sisters must remember, since you are cultivating in this Xiaoyu cave, you must abide by the rules of the sect and cultivate diligently. If there is no order from your master, you are not allowed to go out without permission. Do you understand?" When the two Wang sisters heard Zhang Yan say that he would take them as disciples, even though they would still be honorary disciples, they relaxed and said in unison, "Disciple will obey master's orders." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Stand up." In these 3 years, besides cultivating and deducing techniques, he would occasionally take some time to teach Lu Yenny so that she would be able to do well in the grand competition. As for the two sisters, he was going to order them to first study the eroding symbols for a year and a half. With a flick of his sleeve, a brilliant talisman flew out and entered the foreheads of the two girls. He said seriously, "This is the clear spirit scripture and the eroding symbol calculation method. If you two sisters have anything you don't understand, you can ask eldest senior sister Lu Yenny for guidance." The two girls hurriedly turned and bowed to Lu Yenny. Zhang Yan also said, "Yenny, as the eldest senior sister, if you have time, you can give them a pointer or two." Lu Yenny hurriedly said, "Disciple will help master." The scripture of cleansing qi, that Zhang Yan had given him was the original book of the eroded text, but later generations had interpreted it. He purposely did not hide it because he wanted to see the temperament of the two girls. He wanted to see if they would disobey his master's orders and practice the martial arts first. He would come back a year later to see if they really had the temperament, then he would teach them. He wasn't purposely trying to make things difficult for his two disciples. Right now, all the techniques of the sects were written in the eroding symbol method, but even if many cultivators could understand it, they wouldn't be willing to spend much effort to read it. Most of the time, they would only read the explanations later on. If they skipped this step, they would lose a part of their own comprehension. Although it didn't seem to be much different, there would be a slight difference as their cultivation progressed. Lu Yeni only used 20 years to reach the mystic light realm without any problems. One reason was because her talent was high, and the other was because she first cultivated the eroding symbol method when she was learning the clear spirit scripture. Only after she comprehended the mysteries within did she start to cultivate qi, so her foundation was extremely firm. The only exception under Zhang Yan's tutelage was Tian Kun. Because the cultivation techniques that Tian Kun practiced had already been properly arranged by Gui Tsongyao, Zhang Yan naturally didn't have to worry about it himself, and he just had to teach Tian Kun step by step. After the two girls stood up, Wang Kaiwei took a step forward and said, "Master, my family is quite well off. Today, there are some gifts for us two sisters to give to you." Wang Kading also said, "That's right, some of them were personally picked by disciple to give to master." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Since it's out of filial piety, then bring them over." The Wang sisters had brought with them many servants and many rare treasures. These were all things that the Wang sisters had spent a great deal of effort to gather, but Zhang Yan didn't care about them. It was just that he couldn't ignore the wishes of his two disciples, so he took the list and looked at it before putting it to the side. Just as he was about to speak, he felt a movement in his sleeve. He couldn't help but be surprised. After a moment of silence, he flicked his sleeve and a white light flew out, heading straight for Wang Kaiwei. Everyone was surprised when they saw this. Wang Kaiwei didn't have time to react at all. She only felt her brow tremble slightly before she felt a swelling sensation. It was as if a small and sickly girl in white had walked in. This girl's aura and expression were similar to hers, but when she wanted to take a closer look, it disappeared. She didn't know what was going on and unconsciously looked toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan looked at her a few times and sighed, "I didn't expect it to be an opportunity for you, Kaiwei. I don't know if it's good or bad for you." He smiled and didn't say anything more. With a wave of his sleeve, he went to the main residence and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Although Wang Kaiwei had received a treasure, she was still confused and didn't know what it was. She only felt that she had received a great benefit, but from Master's tone, it didn't seem like it was a good thing. She felt slightly uneasy. Just as she was thinking, she felt her sleeve being pulled. She looked sideways and saw her younger sister staring at her curiously. She said unhappily, "Fourth sister, what are you looking at?" Wang Kading blinked and said, "Third sister, don't you think it's strange?" Wang Kaiwei was surprised. "What's strange about it?" Wang Kading counted with her fingers and said, "Master has never seen us two sisters. How could he tell that sister is sister at a glance?" Wang Kaiwei was also slightly puzzled. The two sisters looked very similar. When they were together, even their parents couldn't tell them apart. She didn't know how Master could tell. She said uncertainly, "It must be some kind of celestial magic?" Then, as if he had realized something, he lightly knocked Wang Kading's head and said with a straight face, "You're asking for a beating. Have you forgotten? You're not allowed to talk about the elders behind their backs." Target equals _blank. Chapter 305. Winter passed and spring came. It was another year of winter and summer. Book C Pavilion / Book C Pavilion, advertisement full text in the main residence of Zhaoyu Heaven Lake. Zhang Yan held the broken jade in his hand and started to visualize. There were only two paths left in his sea of consciousness, and one of them was the divine technique that he had been looking for a long time. He opened his eyes and slowly retreated from the broken jade. He sat up straight and slowly adjusted his breathing. After 10 breaths, the exhaustion on his body was swept away. Within this year, he had already consecutively eliminated 4 different paths. Based on this, with another half a year's worth of effort, he would be able to reverse the cultivation technique and use another year's worth of time to study and practice it. He would be able to master it before the large competition. Now, 1 day in the broken jade was equivalent to more than 40 days in the outside world. This year's time was equivalent to 40 years of deduction. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that it was not so simple. If it was someone else deducing the technique, how could the Dan Sha be as vigorous and deep as he was? He was afraid that it would not be long before it would be exhausted. He could only meditate and slowly recover his vitality. That would at least take a few times more effort than him. If that was the case, he would not need more than 100 years. He shook his head and sighed in his heart. No wonder there were so few people in the sect who practiced the 9 sutras. If it was not for the help of the broken jade, how many people in the world would be able to continue on this path? This Tao scripture was not like other techniques. When deducing, not only would it not increase one's cultivation, it would also consume the Dan Sha and wear down one's mind. Because of this, one's cultivation would definitely be delayed. After 100 years passed like this, the disciples of the younger generation improved and ceaselessly caught up, whereas the cultivators of the same generation left them far behind. Just think about it, how many people would be willing to be lonely, continue to endure, and persist until the end when they saw such a scene? He thought for a while, shook his head and smiled. With a wave of his long sleeve, a cloud of smoke flew out and rolled up the true fighting sand under the jade couch. After a while, when the Sha disappeared, there was essence chi condensed into a ball. He raised his head and inhaled, swallowed it into his stomach, and then used his technique to absorb it. About 2 hours later, he withdrew from meditation. His eyes were bright and he was in high spirits. When he was in seclusion in the mansion for a year, he had instructed that if there was nothing important, no one was to disturb him. Now that he had some spare time, he cast a spell out and activated the small pot mirror to check the situation in the cave. Among the disciples under his tutelage, Lu Yenni's aptitude was the highest, and she was also the one who made the most decisions. Therefore, she didn't spend her days comprehending the profound mysteries of Tao and shut herself in the world. Instead, she frequently went out to slay demons. Not only could she accumulate merits by doing so, she could also hone her flying sword slaying art. With the help of the sword pellet, she could fly and escape freely without any restrictions. In addition, she had the protection of the guardian Lingxi. Even if she encountered a troublesome demon, as long as she wasn't obsessed with fighting, she could always escape. Therefore, in this 1 year, she had accumulated more merits than she had in the previous 20 years. Her swordsmanship had also become more refined. In addition, she remembered Zhang Yan's instructions. Every day, she would first nourish the sword pellet and then take some time to teach the Wang sisters how to decipher the erosive writings. Zhang Yan nodded to himself. He didn't need to worry too much about this eldest disciple of his. Therefore, he only glanced at her and then brushed his sleeve. The surface of the mirror rippled and the Wang sisters appeared in a cave. Wang Kating's beautiful eyes looked at the shining pearl in the sky. She rested her chin on her hands and was deep in thought. In the past year, she had been in this cave every day calculating and deducing the erosive writings. She didn't leave the cave. Even with her lively and active personality, she was very depressed. In addition to the underwater cave, the heavenly lake of clear serenity was also covered in mist. It was unusually vast and there were many wonderful scenic spots that disciples couldn't resist going there to play. However, Wang Kating hadn't cultivated any cultivation technique up until now, so her body was only slightly stronger than an ordinary person's. Moreover, she had to consume a medicinal pill that improved her physique and cleansed her muscles and bones every 4 hours in order to resist the cold air within the abode. Thus, she was utterly unable to go out by herself to relax. Moreover, there were many strange fish and strange beasts in the heavenly lake. They were huge and looked ferocious. Just looking at them made her tremble with fear. If she didn't have someone she knew to lead the way, she wouldn't dare to walk around. She originally wanted to find Tian Kuan to play with, but the latter was a taciturn person. His attitude didn't change because of their marriage. All he knew was to hide in the cave and focus on cultivating. He was even more diligent than Lu Yenny and didn't have the slightest thought to pay attention to her. She often got the door shut in front of her, which made Wang Kating angry and bitter. She was lost in thought for a long time. Feeling a little bored, she looked around and saw her sister seriously reading the book in her hand. From time to time, she would pick up the bamboo chips and play with them. She pouted and couldn't help but push her sister. She tried to find something to say. "Big sister, why does master want us to scribble the writings?" Wang Kaiwei was concentrating on deducing, but she was interrupted by her younger sister. She looked at her with some dissatisfaction and said with a frown, "Fourth sister, just do as master says. Why do you have to ask so many questions?" She knew that this younger sister of hers was smarter than she was, and that she was able to learn the eroding runes extremely quickly. However, her mind was very erratic and she couldn't settle down. However, they were from the same mother, so she couldn't just ignore it. She put down the book and turned to the side. She said seriously, "Fourth sister, there are millions of people in the 9 cities, but only us 2 sisters can become master's disciples. How rare is this opportunity? You should be careful and cherish it as if you're treading on thin ice. How can you be so half-hearted and distracted like you?" Wang Kating saw her third sister's face and quickly pulled her hand. She smiled and said, "Big sister, don't say any more. Little sister knows she was wrong." Seeing her like this, Wang Kaiwei knew that she didn't take it to heart. Wang Kaiwei was also helpless, so she raised her finger and forcefully poked her forehead, saying, Eldest senior sister tests us every month. If we miss a single point, we will be punished to write that clear breath scripture 1,000 times. This time, I won't help you copy it, let's see how you do." Hearing the words punished to write, Wang Kating was shocked. Over the past year, Lu Yenny would come to teach the 2 girls from time to time. Although she had a gentle temperament, she wasn't soft when it came to teaching people. If they couldn't solve the erosive writings, she wouldn't beat or scold them. She would only tell them to copy the scripture 1,000 times. Moreover, if she saw that they were perfunctory, she could always find some omissions and make Wang Kating suffer. She was most afraid of this big sister now. Thus, after muttering a few words, she obediently picked up the bamboo chips and began to deduce the erosive writings with a bitter face. Zhang Yan smiled. It was enough for Lu Yenny to teach these 2 sisters. He didn't have time to care about them right now. He flicked his sleeve and closed the mirror. He said, "Mirror spirit, I've been in seclusion for a few days. Did anything happen in the residence?" The black-robed scholar heard Zhang Yan's call and immediately came out of the mirror. He bowed and said, "Master, everything in the residence is normal. However, 3 months after you went into seclusion, Zhao Hozhou and Xiutong came again. Seeing that you were still in seclusion, they didn't dare to disturb you. They just left a lot of Taoist books and left. They said that if you have time, you can go to Huanzhen Temple and they will wait for you." "Oh? These 2 Taoist friends came back from the immortal residence so quickly?" Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. It seemed that the 2 of them had a smooth journey. He thought for a moment and said, "Let me take a look at the Taoist book." The black-robed scholar said, "Yes." He took out a few jade butterflies from his sleeve. He took 2 steps forward and handed them over respectfully. Zhang Yan pointed with his finger and the jade butterflies swayed and floated in the air. He then cast a few spells into them. Rays of spiritual light rushed out and lines of erosive writings appeared in the light. He took a few glances and saw that it was quite profound and complicated. It wasn't something that could be understood in a short time. He was about to put away the spiritual light and study it when he had time in the future. However, he saw that the erosive writings on one of the jade plates were simple and easy to understand. He could see the clues at a glance. He exclaimed and said to himself, "It's this method?" This was not a cultivation method, nor was it a supernatural Taoist technique. It was a pulse-searching technique. The so-called pulse-searching technique was a technique where a cultivator took a drop of blood and used a spell. No matter how far away they were, they would be able to find someone with similar blood. Although this technique wasn't common, many people knew about it. There were many Taoist cultivators who had the chance to cultivate to a certain realm, and they would use this method to find a descendant who was similar to them. They would teach them cultivation methods and Taoist techniques. In the future, if they were to reincarnate, they could also seek protection from them and enter the Shenmen again. There were many small aristocratic families in the world that were born this way. Zhang Yan reached out and pushed the jade butterfly in front of him. He carefully looked at the spell and found that it wasn't complicated or profound. After a short look, he knew how to use it. With a thought, he took out a drop of blood essence according to the method. As soon as he used the technique, he felt his soul shake. In a trance, he felt a dozen auras that were similar to his own bloodline. One of the breaths was obscure, intermittent, and faintly discernible. It seemed to belong to someone of the same Tao. He was not in the mood to check it out. With a move of his spirit, he hid it before the other person noticed. Then he probed the other breath that was the most conspicuous. This aura was bright and clear. There were 7 to 8 other auras entangled with it. It was obvious that they were his descendants. However, when Zhang Yan scanned it with his spirit, he realized that this aura was extremely weak. It seemed like it would not be long before it left the world. Zhang Yan frowned and thought for a moment. His eyes flashed and he shouted. He turned into a cloud and left the cave. In an instant, he was nowhere to be seen. At the same time, in the Huanzhen Temple, one of the 10 sects of Shenmen sect, in the Baoyang de Hua cave, there was a young lady in a yellow shirt and white dress. Her eyes were bright and kind. Her body trembled slightly and she frowned. A dignified female voice came from the main hall. Why are you distracted? Hurry up and stabilize your mind, and follow your master to circulate the cultivation method. The young lady lowered her head and said softly, "Yes, teacher." She quickly threw away the strange feeling that came from nowhere. She gathered her thoughts and used the technique of her sect. Target equals, _blank. Chapter 306. Wei's western border, rolling mountain. In a fort on the mountain master Zhangzhan was half lying on a bed. He was about 40 years old and had a dignified appearance with black hair and a beautiful beard. Although his cheeks were thin and his skin was dark, showing that he was suffering from a serious illness, his eyes still shone with dignity. He first glanced at his 5 sons standing in front of the bed and saw that they were timid, not daring to raise their heads. He couldn't help but reveal a look of disappointment. His gaze then slowly shifted to the 2 middle-aged men not too far away. Sighing, he said, "Brother Liang Wu, Brother Qian Tong, you've been with me on the mountain for 20 years, right?" Liang Wu was startled for a moment before he seemed to recall something and sighed. "That's right, Lieutenant Yong Tai led us up the mountain in the 3rd year. It's been exactly 20 years now." Zhangzhan nodded. When he was 7 years old, he was kidnapped by a group of bandits and sold to the western border. Later on, out of pity for a dying man named Daoren, he gave him a mouthful of water. He didn't know that the Daoren gave him a martial manual in return, which allowed him to practice martial arts for the rest of his life. At the age of 14, he joined the army and was promoted to lieutenant in just 6 years. Later on, because his superior died in battle, he was afraid that he would be punished when he returned. Thus, he led over 300 troops to attack the bandits at night and annihilate them. After that, he set up camp on Rolling Mountain and became the king. Due to his good luck, they later discovered a fertile basin that could support tens of thousands of people. In their ecstasy, they began to gather refugees. Over the past few decades, the barbarians and the many vassal states at the border fought ceaselessly. More and more refugees joined them and his power grew. Not only did he build a camp on the mountain, he even built dozens of forts at the foot of the mountain. He farmed, collected taxes, forged armors, weapons, strong bows and crossbows, and purchased horses. Now, he had more than 100,000 people under his rule, 8,000 soldiers, fully equipped with armor and horses. He was already a rarely seen great power within a radius of several hundred miles. Even some small vassal states had to rely on him to survive, and he was like a giant of a region. But now, all of this could not stop him from getting sick. Zhang Zhan sighed. I'm already old. Liang Wu anxiously said, Lieutenant only 40 years old now, how can you say he's old? Zhang Zhan solemnly said, Liang Wu, remember this. If I die, you will be in charge of everything on the mountain. Liang Wu was greatly alarmed and cried out involuntarily, Lieutenant, how can you say that? This is only a minor illness, it will be fine after a period of rest. How can you talk about life and death so lightly? Zhang Zhan laughed self-mockingly. I know myself best. Now that I've fallen ill, I won't be able to live for long. Captain Liang wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Zhang Zhan. Just as he was about to say something, he heard someone crying. Zhang Zhan frowned. He knew that it was his useless sons. Annoyed, he shouted angrily, Cry? Why are you crying? I'm not dead yet. If he cries again, I'll break his legs. For more than 20 years, he had absolute power over their lives. Once he got angry, his sons immediately stopped crying and kept quiet out of fear. When the fierce-looking middle-aged man in front of the bed saw this, his heart palpitated and a complicated look appeared in his eyes. After cursing, Zhang Zhan seemed to feel a little tired. He closed his eyes and rested for a while before turning to Liang Wen and saying, Brother Liang, as you can see, my sons are all good-for-nothings. If you don't come and take over this mountain, who else can? We can't let the blood, sweat, and tears of our old brothers go to waste. Liang Wu firmly shook his head and said, That won't do. Eldest nephew is still learning martial arts at Spirit Bridge Taoist Palace. Lieutenant's foundation should be taken over by him. The eldest nephew he spoke of was Zhang Zhan's eldest son, Zhang Chund. Because Zhang Zhan had received the Taoist priest's kindness when he was young, he had always respected the Taoist priest. This son of his had been sent to Spirit Bridge Taoist Palace to learn martial arts at a young age. He had only returned once the year before last, and although he was only 19 years old, no one on the mountain was his match. When he fought with a spear, he was able to fight against 100 people. His bravery was exceptional, and the younger generation of Rolling Python Mountain were all convinced by him. Zhang Zhan suddenly turned his head and asked the fierce-looking man, Brother Qian Tong, what do you think? Qian Tong's expression became a little unnatural when he was suddenly asked this question. He coughed and said, De Chund is brave and vigorous. This foundation should be taken over by him. Zhang Zhan sternly said, The young are too crude, how can they convince the masses? Liang Wu loudly shouted, Lieutenant, what are you saying? If you let eldest nephew take over, I, Liang Wu, will be the first to not let anyone who dares to have any ill intentions go. You just need to recuperate well. After you recover, these old brothers will listen to you. Qian Tong's eyelids twitched. Although he looked nonchalant, there was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Zhang Zhan sighed, Then we'll talk about it in 2 days. All of you leave first, I want to have a few words with my children. Liang Wu and Qian Tong knew that Zhang Zhan had something to say to his family in private, so they cupped their hands and retreated. After they left, Zhang Zhan's eyes finally fell on a 13 or 14-year-old girl. He revealed a smile and said, Ling Yu, come here. Everyone else can leave. His sons were all born from concubines and had weak personalities. Hearing these words, they all walked out as if they had been granted amnesty. Only the young girl walked over and sat on the bed, holding her father's hand. She felt that her father's hand, which was usually warm and strong, was now weak and soft, cold. She couldn't help but feel a little sad as she said, Father. Zhang Zhan grabbed her wrist. She felt a sharp pain in her wrist, but she didn't dare to pull it out. Zhang Zhan's eyes shone brightly as he said in a low voice, Ling, listen to me. Someone wants to harm your father. Leave the mountain tonight and find your eldest brother. Tell him to come back overnight. His father's body was originally strong and healthy, and he also had a shallow cultivation technique. He was impervious to cold and heat, and was immune to 100 diseases. This illness came without rhyme or reason, so he suspected that he had been struck by some evil technique. However, he wasn't sure who it was that wanted to harm him. Just now, Although he had some ideas, he didn't dare to take the risk. Thus, he sent his usually bold daughter down the mountain to bring his eldest son back. Zhang Lingyu was stunned. "Father," Zhang Zhan said in an unquestionable tone, "don't ask too many questions. Just do as I say. If you can't find him before dawn, don't return to the mountain. In the future, just wait for him to take revenge for me. Go." Zhang Lingyu hesitated for a moment before biting her lower lip and saying, "Yes, father." After Qian Tong returned to his residence, he sat in silence for a long time before getting up and going to the back hall. Pushing open the door, he saw a Taoist sitting on a prayer mat. This person had a sharp chin and narrow eyes. As he sat there, it was impossible to tell whether his eyes were open or closed. Qian Tong asked with a gloomy face, "When will he die?" A light flashed in the Taoist's eyes as he said, "It won't be long. After being poisoned by my energy dissipation powder, he'll die by tomorrow night without a doubt. Didn't you say you weren't in a hurry?" Qian Tong's expression fluctuated for a moment before he sighed and said, "A tiger can't fall even if it's dead. Zhang Zhan is seriously ill and won't live for long, but when I probed around, no one dared to make the slightest move." The Taoist chuckled and said, "If you want him to die earlier, it's easy." Qian Tong was somewhat tempted, but after hesitating for a moment, he suppressed this thought and said, "No, if he suddenly dies, it will arouse the suspicions of Liang Wu and the other old brothers. Now is not the best time to act." At this time, a middle-aged woman with a fat face hurried over and said, "Master, master, there's a problem." Qian Tong glanced at her and asked impatiently, "What is it?" "Zhang Lingyu went down the mountain an hour ago." "If she went down the mountain, then so be it. What's the matter?" Qian Tong was only halfway through his sentence when he suddenly realized something. His expression suddenly changed and he stood up, saying, // the fastest text is updated. Book C Pavilion, no advertisement / not good. Quickly send people to chase after her. The middle-aged woman curled her lips and said, "That little girl is riding a green shadow horse from the castle. This horse is a tribute from the Yumian kingdom. How can we catch up to her?" Qian Tong revealed a murderous glare and said sternly, "I told you to keep an eye on Zhang Zhan's backyard. Why did you only find out now?" The middle-aged woman was so frightened that she took 2 steps back and put her hand on her chest, saying, "What are you shouting for? That little girl went through a secret waterway. If it weren't for my spies outside the mountain, I wouldn't have known that she had left the castle." The veins on Qian Tong's forehead bulged as he paced back and forth in annoyance, muttering to himself, "If she went down the mountain now, she must have gone to call Zhang Chun back. That little bastard's martial arts are very strong. If I wait for him to come back, won't all my previous efforts be in vain?" The Taoist said with certainty, "Mountain Lord Qian, why are you so impatient? It's just a small matter, in my opinion. It's not worth it." "Oh? Taoist who Miaoli?" Taoist who said coldly, "Watch me use a Taoist technique to take Zhang Ling's life from 1,000 miles away." Qian Tong was skeptical. If this Taoist could take someone's life from 1,000 miles away, why would he come up the mountain? However, at the moment, he could only try his luck and said, "Can it be done? Then please do it, Taoist who." Taoist who chuckled and muttered some incantations. He didn't have the ability to take someone's life from 1,000 miles away, but he had done something to the stables before he came, especially to the horses. He only needed to chant an incantation to make them go berserk and throw people off. This was just a small spell, but he had to exaggerate as much as possible in his words so that others would fear him. However, Qian Tong was still worried. After thinking for a moment, his face turned ferocious and said, "Zhang Zhan must be suspecting me. Now that things have come to this, I can't care too much." He turned his head and cupped his fists, saying, "Taoist who, I'm counting on you." The Taoist laughed and stood up, saying, "Mountain Lord Qian, you should have done this earlier. If you had done it earlier, there would have been no need to go through so much trouble. Whoever you want to kill, just tell and I guarantee that no one will be spared." Hearing him call him Mountain Lord, the fire in Qian Tong's heart burned even brighter. his eyes glinting fiercely, he clenched his teeth and stretched out his hand, saying, "Taoist Hu, if this matter succeeds, I will not go back on my word. Every year, I will offer 500 young boys and girls for you to refine pills." Hearing this, Taoist Hu's eyes lit up and he happily said, "Mountain Lord Qian, it's a deal. Good, I will do it now." After Zhang Linger went down the mountain, she urged her horse to gallop. However, she couldn't see the road clearly at night, so she couldn't go all out. At this speed, she feared that she wouldn't be able to reach the Spirit Bridge Palace before dawn. After all, she was just a little girl. Her heart was anxious and impatient. Once she was distracted, there was nothing else. Suddenly, the horse beneath her trembled. With a sudden neigh, it retracted its hooves and raised its body, sending her flying into the air. Zhang Linger's beautiful face paled. If this fall landed, even if she didn't die, she would be half crippled. Just as she was thinking that she wouldn't be able to survive, she felt a gentle force supporting her arm, and she stood firmly on the ground. She raised her head and saw a young Taoist standing in front of her. Looking at his appearance, he seemed vaguely familiar. Zhang Linger's beautiful eyes widened, and she couldn't help but call out in surprise, "Big brother, is that you? Quickly go and save father. Father is about to be harmed by bad people." The Taoist's eyes flashed, and he faintly smiled, saying, "My niece, don't be impatient. With I here, who can harm his life?" Book C Pavilion, target equals, _blank. Chapter 307. Qian Tong held a bow and saber while Taoist Hu held a banner as the two of them walked towards the castle's inner mansion. Upload updates. Along the way, a fragrant aroma wafted through the air. Anyone who smelled this aroma, whether it was the guards, maids, birds, or livestock, all collapsed to the ground, unable to move. They could only watch as the two of them passed through the rooms as if there was no one else around. This aroma was easy to deal with ordinary people, but it wasn't so effective against those with strong internal qi. They had to be dealt with personally. What's more, Qian Tong couldn't feel at ease without seeing Zhang Zhan die in front of him. The two of them walked straight in, but when they arrived at the inner chamber, Qian Tong stopped in his tracks. He was also on high alert. He knew that Zhang Zhan wasn't someone easy to deal with, so he wasn't in a hurry to cross the threshold. After scanning the room with a sharp gaze and confirming that there were no traps, he sneered and strode in. Seeing the person lying on the bed, his eyes narrowed and his hand steadily reached down, slowly pulling out the saber hanging from his waist. Then, like a spirit ape, he rushed forward and slashed down with all his strength. Just as the saber was about to fall, a hand suddenly stretched out from the quilt and accurately caught his wrist while the other hand clasped the back of the saber like an iron pincer. Qian Tong was startled, struggling to free himself. He knew the situation was bad and quickly abandoned his saber, angrily shouting, "Who is it?" Then he saw the person clearly and his body shook. "Liang Wu?" Liang Wu tore open the curtain and jumped out, his face full of anger as he glared at Qian Tong. "The lieutenant was right. You really want to rebel." Qian Tong was a little flustered at first, but when he glanced behind him and saw Taoist Hu also striding in, he calmed himself down and coldly said, "So what if I am? Where's Zhang Zhan? Did he run away?" Liang Wu clenched his fists. "Qian Tong, I don't understand. The lieutenant has always treated you well. Why do you want to harm him?" But Qian Tong suddenly became agitated, waving the saber in his hand and shouting, "Because I'm not willing. This foundation was built by us old brothers, so why should we hand it over to that kid who's still wet behind his ears?" Priest Hu walked up and said with a fake smile, "Why bother talking so much nonsense with him? Zhang Zhan was seriously ill. Even if he escapes, he won't be able to live for long. Quickly get rid of this person and kill Zhang Zhan's sons. Then, Rolling Python Mountain will be yours." Hearing this, Liang Wu's body trembled as he angrily shouted, "Qian Tong, you dare to kill the lieutenant's family today. Aren't you afraid that Chund will come and kill your family in the future?" Qian Tong was a bit hesitant. He indeed had some misgivings about this, and if he killed Zhang Zhan today, he could use the excuse that he was seriously ill. How many people would listen to him? priest whose narrowed eyes flashed with a cunning glint as he said, "Weeds need to be cut by the roots. As for those who are disobedient, I will take care of them for you. What are you afraid of?" He wanted Qian Tong to be ruthless so that he would have to rely on himself even more. "You demon!" Liang Wu was furious. He stepped forward and threw a punch at Taoist Hu's face. His strength was outstanding. He had also received pointers from Zhang Zhan and was able to kill lions and tigers empty-handed when he was young. Although he was not as strong as before, he was still in the prime of his life. His punch was still full of strength. Taoist Hu was not flustered at all. With a mischievous smile, he flicked his sleeve and a talisman flew out. He shouted, "Thunder!" With a loud bang, the entire inner room seemed to shake. Liang Wu was immediately knocked back by the talisman and fell 10 feet away. He struggled to get up, but after spitting out a few mouthfuls of blood he no longer had any strength left. He stared at Taoist Hu with bloodshot eyes and said, "Demon Taoist." Taoist Hu contemptuously waved his sleeves, "You mortals, no matter how skilled you are in martial arts, in the eyes of us immortals, you are nothing but a joke." Qian Tong also felt fear in his heart when he saw Liang Wu being defeated by Taoist Hu with just a wave of his hand. He looked at Liang Wu and tried to persuade him, "Big brother Liang, why must you follow Zhang Zhan to the end? You have seen for yourself, Taoist Hu's magic power is boundless. If I invite him to guard Rolling Python Mountain, who would dare to provoke us in the future? You and I, brothers, will join hands and use this as a foundation. We will recruit soldiers and buy horses, attack cities and conquer territories, destroy countries and open up new frontiers. We will also learn from the Great Wei dynasty's founding ancestor and conquer a great land and rivers. In the future, I will be the emperor and you will be the great general. I will guarantee that your descendants will be dukes and marquises for generations to come and enjoy endless glory and wealth." Liang Wu spat and said, "Despicable person. Ungrateful person, shut up and don't pollute my ears." Being scolded by Liang Wu, Qian Tong immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation and raised his saber, but at this moment, a voice called out from behind the tent, "Stop." Although Qian Tong was fierce, he couldn't help shivering when he heard this voice. Turning his head, he saw Zhang Zhan being supported by a young servant as he walked out. Zhang Zhan's eyes stared straight at Qian Tong and said, "Qian Tong, are you the one who caused my illness?" Zhang Zhan was tall, so Qian Tong didn't feel anything when he was lying in bed, but standing in front of Qian Tong at this time, the pressure he felt was very heavy. Qian Tong couldn't help taking a few steps back. Although he had imagined killing Zhang Zhan countless times in his mind, he still couldn't help feeling afraid. Taking a deep breath, Qian Tong puffed out his chest and shouted, "That's right. It's me who wants to kill you." Zhang Zhan nodded and said in a deep voice, "All of you come out." With a loud bang, the screens on both sides were overturned and a number of soldiers rushed out with crossbows in their hands. These soldiers were all clad in iron armor and their bodies were covered from head to toe in fine steel armor. There were a total of 36 of them and they instantly moved to protect Liang Wu and Zhang Zhan behind them. Raising their crossbows high, they aimed them at Qian Tong and Taoist Hu. Seeing the cold and threatening crossbow bolts in their hands, Qian Tong couldn't help taking 2 steps back and asking in surprise, "Iron Mask guards? When did you get transferred here?" Taoist Hu didn't show the slightest fear, instead smiling contemptuously, "No matter how many come, there's still mortals." Zhang Zhan's eyes darkened. If he were to stay in bed and recuperate, he might be able to delay his death, but right now he knew he couldn't hold on much longer. Not wanting to waste any more time, Zhang Zhan waved his hand and the soldiers unhesitatingly pressed down on the crossbow bolts in their hands. With the twang of a bowstring, 36 crossbow bolts shot towards the 2 of them. Taoist Hu laughed heartily and crushed the jade pendant in his hand. In an instant, a ray of light as bright as the sun shrouded the 2 of them. Just now, the crossbow bolts shot towards them, but they all shattered as if they had hit a steel wall. Taoist Hu snorted and brought the banner in front of him, then bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. The flag immediately trembled, and a ghostly phantom appeared. As soon as it appeared, a gust of chilly wind blew up out of thin air, and the candles were instantly extinguished. It emitted a sharp howl that sounded like a sob, and it transformed into a black light that circled around the inner room. Those iron-masked soldiers originally wanted to resist, but the phantom was formless and formless. After it passed through their bodies, they felt a chill. Then, their vision went black, and they fell to the ground without a sound. Then they stopped breathing. Taoist who secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but his back was drenched in cold sweat. This banner was something he had obtained by chance, and as long as he used it, he could collect a person's soul. It was just that his foundation was too weak. He could collect the souls of ordinary people, but these 36 Iron Mask guards were battle-hardened warriors with firm wills and no fear of death. Thus, he could only use his blood essence to forcibly collect their souls. If he failed, he would immediately suffer severe damage to his vitality, and it would take him more than 10 years to recover. Fortunately, his luck was good and he managed to barely succeed, but his face was as white as paper and his hands and feet were sore. It was far from being as easy as he made it sound. Qian Tong was still in a state of shock. Seeing the ferocious Iron Mask guards being cut down like paper by Taoist who, he laughed wildly and pointed his saber forward. Zhang, you want to kill me? You want to kill me? Today, I want to see if it's you or me who dies. Zhang looked at the Iron Mask guards lying on the ground and shook his head. With a wave of his hand, he pushed aside the servant who was supporting him and stood up straight. There's no need to say anything more. The winner is king and the loser is a thief. Zhang's life is here, come and take it. A hint of joy appeared on Taoist Hu's face. Today, as long as this person died, Rolling Python Mountain would fall into Qian Tong's hands. Then, he would be able to use young boys and girls to refine Renuan treasure pills to strengthen his soul and blood essence. In less than 7 or 8 years, he would be able to open his meridians and break through. Thinking of this, Taoist Hu laughed. With me here today, no matter what tricks you have up your sleeves, you still won't be a match for my magic power. Who would have thought that as soon as these words came out, a voice from outside sneered, "You dare to call your magic power with such a petty trick?" Just as this voice fell, another voice called out, "Father, father." Taoist whose complexion greatly changed. The person who spoke just now had a voice as loud as a mountain and as deep as the sea, causing his eardrums to ring and his internal qi to become chaotic, as if this person could kill him with a single shout. Others might not be able to sense it, but as a cultivator, he was able to sense just how terrifying this person was. For a time, he couldn't even think of running away. At this time, Qian Tong also felt that something was wrong, but his senses weren't as sharp as Taoist Hu's, so he thought that Zhang Lingyu had invited an expert from the Spirit Bridge Temple. However, he had waited for this moment for more than 10 years, so how could he give up now? A crazed look suddenly appeared on his face and with a loud shout, he raised the saber in his hand and slashed down towards Zhang. At this time, Zhang was already using all his strength to stand up straight, so he was powerless to dodge. Sighing inwardly, he closed his eyes and waited for his death. However, after waiting for a long time, there was still no movement, so he slowly opened his eyes and saw that Qian Tong was frozen in place, a thin line of blood slowly leaking from his neck. Then, his entire head slid off his neck and the headless corpse fell to the ground. He subconsciously took a step back, but his body was on the verge of collapsing. He hurriedly stretched out his hand to hold on to the pillar and looked forward. He saw a Taoist standing at the doorway. His clothes were fluttering in the wind, and his entire body was enshrouded in a smoke-like mist. He looked like a celestial being. The arrogant Taoist who was kneeling in front of him, trembling all over, not daring to raise his head. Zhang was overjoyed and asked, "Is it that immortal from Spirit Bridge Temple? Did my son come with us?" Suddenly, he felt that the person in front of him was familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. After thinking for a while, his eyes suddenly widened, and his face revealed a bewildered expression. His lips moved a few times, and he said, You. The Taoist looked at him and smiled. "Second brother, it's been more than 30 years since we last met. Don't you recognize me?" Target =_blank. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.